Hello everyone, today I'll go over what if Deku becomes a hero as the Doom Slayer Part 2, the finale. And let's begin. Chapter 5, USJ Division. It had been 2 days since battle training and everyone was extremely tense around Bakugo. The first time he'd walked into class, everyone watched him with either nerves, anger, or disgust. But when the teen simply kept his head down and slowly trudged to his desk, not saying a thing, everyone was surprised. They'd expected to find it was because of his punishment, but when they learned it was 40 hours of mandatory community service, 2 weeks of detention, and suspension from hero classes, they were shocked. And honestly, some were hoping for much more. Today had a different issue, however. Today, Izuku was dealing with the most trying part of being a hero. The one thing almost all heroes dread internally, despite what good it can bring them. Reporters. "This can't be real," the Verdinet said as he stared at the mass of story-hungry newsgroups crowded in front of the gates to Uahai. Maybe it's a part of the training, you know, like how to deal with the media," Uraraka said, though it was obvious she didn't believe it herself. "I highly doubt that, Uraraka," Iida said. "Sadly, this is quite normal for popular heroes. Getting through them is going to be irritating." Izuku tried to rein in his frustration, but this was just stupid. "Yeah, maybe if we answer a question or two they'll leave us alone." "No, they're like piranhas, Uraraka. Give them a sniff of what they want and they'll swarm till they get all of it." "Great." Izuku sighed before beginning what would be a long trek to the main gates. When the reporters spotted the 3 friends approaching, they immediately surged to surround them. "Hey you." Izuku glared at the microphone a female reporter shoved into his face. "Can you tell us what it is like to work so closely to All Might?" No comment. When the reporter moved to say something else, he simply pushed through them. And not a single one of them could stop him. As the reporter huffed, she turned to a very nervous Uraraka who had tried to sneak by silently. "Are you one of All Might's students?" Uraraka let out a small eep as she was suddenly surrounded. "Tell us, what is it like to work with the symbol of peace in person?" "You What's he like in person?" "Well, he's cool. And super muscly?" "Yeah." "How is he faring as a teacher? What are you learning?" Uraraka was beginning to feel very overwhelmed as she'd never dealt with anything like this in her life. As if by a miracle, Iida stepped in between her and the reporter and began to answer the question. "I shall sacrifice myself for the greater good. Run, Uraraka. Run for your mental health." Uraraka could hear those words echo in his mind as he graciously allowed her to escape. "Your heroic actions will be remembered forever. Thank you, Iida." Uraraka thought back as she ran as fast as she could to catch up with Deku. With Iida, he began his answer, hoping his plan would work. "His leadership and wisdom remind me on a daily basis that I attend the world's most prestigious educational institution." Seeing their eyes glaze over, he persevered. The more he ranted, the more lost and annoyed they became. As their attention was focused on him, he subtly motioned for multiple students to hurry past, which they did, all giving him slight bows of appreciation before scampering through the gates to safety. When he finished his long rant, Iida calmly turned around and walked through the gates. When Iida reached the classroom and rejoined his friends, Uraraka smiled at the taller teen. "Thanks for the save, Iida. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do there." "It is fine, Uraraka. I'm sure we will learn the proper tactics for media subversion in the future. The proper response to the media is an important part of being a hero, after all. It's crazy to think that's what All Might has to deal with every day, isn't it?" The girl with jacks for ears, Juru, added. Izuku just nodded. The media wasn't a thing when fighting all of hell. The only media you got was old video, and anything current was updates on demon hell nests and attack patterns. If there was any other form of news, he certainly didn't know about it. The whispers around class quieted as Aizawa entered the room, holding a small stack of papers. "All right, let's get down to business." Everyone watched their teacher quietly as he looked over them all, menacingly. "This first task will decide your future." Oh no, most of the class began to sweat, their nerves frayed. What did he mean this would decide their future? You need to decide on a class representative. Oh good, just normal school stuff. And so began the arguing. Almost everyone is vying for being class president. That is, everyone except 2 people. Hey Deku, why aren't you trying to be president? Izuku snorted at the idea and looked at Uraraka with a small smile on his face. I am, quite honestly, the worst person to choose to lead. I can do it, but I do better working by myself. Having to lead others would only cause problems for me and those I'm leading. I don't think that's true. I think you'd be a great leader. You lead me during the battle training. I am not sure those are the same thing. It feels different helping lead a fight rather than leading a classroom. Izuku admitted. As the madness continued, Izuku turned to the still motionless form of Bakugo, who had yet to throw his hat in the ring. He seemed preoccupied with something else. Like the world around him wasn't registering. He'd better shake his funk soon, Izuku thought. If he keeps this up, he's going to get himself killed. Silence. Everyone, please. Everyone quieted down to look at Iida. The class representative's duty is to lead others. That's not something just anyone can do. You must first have the trust of every student in the classroom. Therefore, the most logical way to fill this position is democratically. We will hold an election to choose our leader. Everyone quietly stared at Iida's hand, which was raised higher than everyone else. It was obvious he wanted everyone's votes with this idea. Is this really the best idea? Kaminari asked. It's only been a few days, Asui pointed out. How do we know who we can trust? Besides, everyone will just vote for themselves, right? Most people will. But that means the person who does receive the most votes must be the person most suitable for the job. It's the best way, right sir? Do whatever you want, just decide before my nap is over. It didn't take long to finish the voting process, and once they had finished, Izuku could only stare at the board in shock, and if he was being honest, a hint of annoyance. How in the 9 hells did I get 4 votes? Sitting at the top of the votes was his name, with 4 votes. Yaoyorozu sat just underneath his own name with 3 votes. The person he himself had voted for. When no one said anything, he glanced around the room in shock and saw 3 people avoiding his gaze. Iida, Uraraka, and Asui. He glared at them, but was still confused as to that 4th vote. Iida seemed sad no one had voted for him, but seeing as he had no votes, it was obvious he'd been one of the 3. As did Uraraka and Asui. Didn't I tell you I didn't want it? He said, narrowing his eyes at the brunette. She just began to whistle innocently and he quickly realized this was not a fight he was going to win. He couldn't punch this one to death. Or, he could, but that would cause more problems than it would solve, and also hurt his friends, so that was a no-go. All right. The class representative is Midoriya, Aizawa said from inside his sleeping bag, and the deputy is Yaoyorozu. Izuku held his head in his hand, pinching his nose. While I'm not the happiest to be the president, I'll try as best I can. I make no promises, and please for the love of Dinner, if you think I'm sucking, replace me. I don't know, I think I can get behind this, Kaminari said, smiling. Yeah, you were pretty manly during the battle training. And Yaoyorozu was totally on top of it with our training results and her own battle training. This should work out. Despite the budding friendship, and the fact he voted for Midoriya himself, it still hurt Iida not to receive any votes and not be elected for a role he so desperately desired. Iida did his best to not shake in frustration. It was fine. Everything was fine. Finally, lunch came around and everyone went to the cafeteria. Due to it being shared by all the classes, it did take a while to find a seat, but when they did, Izuku immediately began to stare them down. So, care to share why you decided to vote for me? When I said I did not want it?
Why would you think that we voted for you, Deku? That's just crazy. Maybe it. Uraraka, you had 0 votes and I'm almost confident you did not vote for Yaoyorozu. Everyone else besides the Yaoyorozu and I had 1 vote. Can I invoke the 5th? That's an American thing and none of us are from America, Uraraka.
Iida cut the 2 off before Uraraka could panic anymore. I for one believe you will be a very capable leader. You showed clear strength and courage during combat class yesterday and obviously have the ability to think and strategize under stress, all of which are important skills for a leader. Not to mention your own strength and show of abilities. Izuku just looked at Iida in silence. Those were certainly good reasons, and as much as he wanted to argue with it, Izuku couldn't. They were skills he'd learned training with Blaskowitz, and while he wasn't comfortable with leading after hundreds of years of going solo, those lessons were still ingrained into his mind. Despite himself, he knew he could pull them up again if he really needed to. Didn't you want to be representative really badly? I mean, you do look the part, with the glasses and all. Is that really how we should be judging someone's ability to lead? Iida ignored the comment, as he calmly sipped his orange juice. Wanting a job and being suited for it are quite different things. I realize my aspirations are high and I desire to prove myself in my family's name, but that does not mean I can't acknowledge Midoriya's innate ability in such a position is greater than my own. Observing the Iida family agency has taught me that much. I wouldn't say it's innate. Wait a minute, agency? Your family runs an agency? It's nothing. Honestly. Izuku and Uraraka gave the nervous Iida a blank stare. Yeah, right. That brings up another thing I've noticed. Iida. Admit it, you're filthy rich. Iida looked like an imp in front of his super shotgun before letting out a resigned sigh. I was afraid this would happen. I tried so hard to hide it. The two other friends continued to stare at Iida before he gave in. You see, my family has been heroes for generations. It runs in our blood. Do you mean that literally? PFF'd. Not quite, but a good joke nonetheless. Are the two of you familiar with the turbo hero, Ingenium? Izuku had to run through his brain real quick to grab the name. He'd been trying to rememorize his notebooks and that name had come up once or twice in his quirk journals. I believe so. He's a hero that has around 65 sidekicks that work for him and is stationed in Tokyo if I remember it right. Wait, he's your older brother, isn't he? Correct, Iida said proudly. Uraraka stared at him with stars in her eyes. Whoa, that's awesome. Your family is famous. That is pretty amazing, honestly. I am betting you're planning to intern with him when you get the chance, correct? Absolutely. I am ecstatic for such an amazing opportunity as working with my older brother, Tensai. Iida calmed down a bit and smiled softly. I desire so much to follow in my brother's footsteps, but I know it's not the time yet. I have much to learn. Yet you seem so prepared and aware of yourself and others. You knew what the judges were looking for during the exam and how to deal with a terrible situation during the combat training. I can't help but see similarities between you and my brother. Izuku, despite himself, felt a smile grow on his face. The level of trust he had apparently developed with the younger Iida was far greater than he had expected. It was nice. Before their conversation could continue, an alarm went off. Over the speakers, a robot female voice echoed across the PA system, saying, "Warning. Level 3 security breach. All students please evacuate the building in an orderly fashion." Any happy thoughts Izuku had were shut off immediately as his brain switched into fight mode. He looked around quickly to identify the danger but couldn't spot any from his current position. Ignoring the world around him, he charged towards the window to see if he could spot anything. Sadly, the panic set in before he could get there, and students began screaming and tripping over each other, stopping him from reaching his destination. Oh, for Mikhail's sake! His teeth ground against each other as he pushed against those holding him back. His superior strength allowed him to make his way through the crowd, but in an effort to not hurt anyone, he pushed forward till he reached the window. Looking outside, he saw it. Rather than an enemy or any kind of threat, it was the reporters from this morning. They'd made it through the gate and were desperately trying to catch anyone they could for an interview. As his own anger built up, he heard someone cry out in pain. Looking behind him, he saw Uraraka making her way next to him. Behind her, he saw it. A girl with mushrooms growing all over her had fallen and was being trampled by terrified students. As she tried to get up, she kept getting accidentally kicked back down and hurt more. And Izuku was sure she wasn't the only one. That was it. That was the final straw. At this point, he was done being nice. Uraraka. The brunette froze when she heard Deku's voice. It didn't sound right. It sounded mean, if she could describe it that way. And yet, her instinct was to trust that tone in the moment, despite her own fear that pushed through her. Float me. She knew what this was. This wasn't a question or a demand. It wasn't friendly or nervous. This was a command from a superior. And she knew she had better do so. She quickly touched Deku with all 5 fingers and watched him float above everyone. He kicked off the wall and as he approached the wall, pulled back his fist.
Crack. The loud sound of concrete breaking froze some people, but what followed next sure did.
Everyone stopped moving now. Deku's tone of voice was demanding and powerful. It carried a weight to it that everyone, despite many being taller, bigger, or even older than the teen, felt instinctive they should listen to. They couldn't deny how their bodies trembled slightly at his words. Anyone with an animal quirk felt the strongest desire to run they had ever felt. As he stared them all down, the fierceness in his eyes, many could swear that there was a small bit of red mist that encircled him. What in Makair's name is wrong with you all? Last I checked, this kind of reaction is cowardice. And your desire to escape is literally trampling others in your way. He gestured from his position above the door to the now standing, sobbing mushroom girl who was cradling her arm. We are all here to be heroes and yet not a single one of you bothered to check out what was wrong or solve the situation.
You panicked like chickens before a wolf. And we are no such thing. If you had just taken the time to look out the window, you would have seen that it was only the reporters from this morning. I highly suggest you all evacuate calmly and avoid hurting those around you just because you are scared. Before he jumped down, he scoffed. I had expected better of people who got into UA Academy. Everyone's heads dropped down in shame as they began to realize their mistakes. Some began to cry. Others began to help out those around them. A few began to glare at Midoriya as he made his way through, checking up on those who'd been trampled in the onslaught. Class 1A, however, stared smugly at their class rep. There was only one thought in their heads.
Oh yeah, he was definitely the right choice. It took a while for everything to calm down enough to where they could finish their meals and head back to class, despite Izuku's outburst. Once they had gotten back, Aizawa came in to discuss what was going to happen this period. Despite him hiding it, Izuku could tell something was wrong, and it had been bugging him. How did the reporters get into UA? Did they destroy the gates? Hack them? Did someone let them in? He had a feeling that the answer to that question was largely the reason for the oppressive air in the room. He could almost hear the haunting echoes of Aldea, scholar of the first sin. Their teacher took a deep breath before speaking. Today's training will be a little different. You'll have 3 instructors. Me, All Might, and another faculty member will be keeping tabs on you. As everyone whispered amongst themselves, Izuku narrowed his eyes. It seems odd that they would have 3 teachers go with us. The break-in is definitely more than just the reporters. But how?
Sir. Zero raised his hand as high as he could. What kind of training is this gonna be? Rescue training. You'll be dealing with natural disasters, shipwrecks, stuff like that. Aizawa answered, and Izuku flinched. This was definitely not something he was good at. Though he'd always wanted to save people, it had almost always meant fighting demons till he was literally waist-high in them. The rescue of people who were still alive was not his strong suit.
Well, this is what a hero academy is for. Izuku grinned. It was weird to think someone like himself had something to learn. After hundreds of years, you'd think he'd have learned it all. But this oddly excited him. Everyone else began to speak excitedly, everyone looking forward to the new challenge. Guys, I'm not finished yet. Everyone was quick to quiet down when he said that. What you wear in this is up to you. I know you're excited about costumes. Aizawa said, clicking a button on a remote in his hands. The walls that held their costumes pushed forward, revealing their capsules holding their beloved hero gear. But keep in mind that you haven't gotten used to them yet and they might limit your abilities. At that, Izuku had to laugh internally. For everyone else, that was true. For him? His armor felt freeing like he was home. This training is at a special, off-campus facility, so we'll be taking a bus to get there. That's all, start getting ready. As Izuku stood, he watched Bakugo silently grab his capsule and leave without a word. Something was wrong, and he wasn't sure if he should be happy or worried about the sudden personality shift with the ashen blonde. It was disconcerting, to say the least. Now, let it be known that when Izuku had let Iida try and organize everyone to sit on the bus, he had found it extremely hilarious when they walked in and found the bus did not have the same layout plan as a normal one. It was almost hysterical to see Iida's crestfallen face as he floundered at how to arrange everyone. Izuku had simply called for everyone to get in and do it quickly, patting Iida on the shoulder as he walked in. So there he sat, with Asui and Sato sitting next to him, everyone trying not to laugh at the depressed Iida sitting at the front of the bus. Why did it have to be an open layout? It's ruined all the plans I had, and after our class representative entrusted me with such a worthy task. Iida, I have not truly laughed in hundreds of years, and you are going to cause me to lose that streak if you are not careful. Iida, you need to chill out. Mina laughed at the engine teen. Everyone else nodded their heads in agreement, also trying not to laugh at the poor boy's predicament. If we're pointing out the obvious, then there is something I want to say, Asui said, turning to look at Midoriya. Without his helmet on yet, she looked him directly in the eyes, which he found interesting, to say the least. About you, actually.
Me, huh, I see no reason to stop you, Asui. What is your question? I told you to call me Sue. Did you? Izuku had to reach back to remember when she had but drew a blank. Regardless, what's your question, Sue? That power of yours, isn't it a lot like All Might's? If there was anything that 300 years of fighting demons was good for, in social scenarios, it was granting you the ability to not react. Because he was surprised at the observation and also, slightly unnerved. Not really. He shook his head good-naturedly. My quirk is called Argent. It uses my strong emotions to turn into Argent energy, which I can then use for special attacks and abilities. On top of that, it's slowly overclocked my body to be ridiculously strong.
Dude, that's awesome, Kirishima grinned. I wish I had a simple augmenting quirk. You could do a lot of flashy stuff with it. My hardening is super strong and can destroy bad guys in a fight, but it doesn't look that impressive. Izuku snorted at that comment. Being able to take hits like a tank is a lot cooler than you think it is. Play your cards right, and people will look at you like you're a bad asterisk asterisk asterisk. You think so? Kirishima asked sincerely. Izuku just nodded. Thanks, man. Still, though, it seems like it'd be easier to be a popular hero if I had something flashier. It was at this point Izuku checked out of the conversation as they began to discuss flashiness, popularity, and other things of that nature. Looking down at his hand, Sue's question rang through his mind like the midnight bell. I have All Might's quirk. I have one for all. So why'd I not feel? Why is it that I can't use it or even get an inkling of what it looks or feel like? He asked himself, a piece of his old self peeking through the current him. Am I doing something wrong? We're here, everyone settle down. Aizawa's words shook Izuku out of his trance. He picked up his helmet from his side and placed it on. The crack in the visor was almost repaired, but its mere existence reminded Izuku of a simple fact. While he could simply replenish his own Argent energy due to some reason he couldn't remember, his suit could not. And he didn't produce enough to sustain it fully. Meaning the longer he stayed here and used it, the more likely it was to break. Granted, this main suit wasn't going to break anytime soon, but the visor? That glass was strong, but without Argent energy reinforcement, it wasn't strong enough to take hits like that consistently. When the bus came to a stop and everyone got off, they saw someone dressed in a puffy astronaut outfit waiting for them outside a very large dome structure. Uraraka squealed and many of the students began to whisper excitedly amongst each other. It took a couple of moments of desperate recall, but he eventually was able to remember from which journal he'd seen this person. The Space Hero, 13. A rescue hero with a pretty good track record, if he remembered correctly. Woohoo, 13 is one of my favorite heroes, Uraraka said with excitement. Izuku just laughed at the girl's antics. It was nice to see her act so innocent. He needed to see more of that. Follow me, you guys. I can't wait to show you what's inside. The space hero ushered everyone along as they continued to walk. As they walked through the doors, everyone gasped at the massive area before them. They could see multiple different domes, arenas, bodies of water, and other setups intended to represent all kinds of natural disasters. The hero began to motion to the different places quickly as she listed them off. A shipwreck, a landslide, a fire, a windstorm, etc. I prepared this facility to help you learn how to deal with different kinds of disasters. I call it the Unforeseen Simulation Joint. But you can call it the USJ. While Izuku felt the name was fair, the blank stares everyone gave the astronaut caused him to wonder if he was missing something. When no one directly commented, many just groaning and some chuckling, he resigned himself to forever miss the joke and moved on. Aizawa walked over to the other teacher and whispered something to her. It took a second before she responded. While most everyone else couldn't hear them, his suit certainly could. And apparently, All Might had used up all his power and was resting in the teacher's lounge. Izuku wanted to be surprised. He really did. But said action was too common for the blonde number 1 hero to be shocking at this point. It just fit so well with who he was, despite how problematic that may seem to the other two teachers, and if he was being honest, himself. Asu Tsu's question was enough to remind him of the glaring issue of one for all, and he needed to talk to the symbol of peace to hopefully get some answers here soon. Well, before we get started, let me just say one thing, or two things. Maybe 3 things. Possibly 4 or 5. We get it. The rest of the class said at the same time, which was more concerning than the hero rambling to Izuku. How the heck did they pull that off? Listen carefully. I'm sure you're aware that I have a powerful quirk. It's called Black Hole. I can use it to suck anything and turn it into dust. Izuku was intrigued by the name and listened closely. He was sure he remembered how it worked from his notebooks, but hearing the details described in person would be much better, and maybe he could update that section when he got home with the better info. And while my quirk has been a great help to save a lot of people, it could very easily be used to kill. Everyone went quiet at that, and Izuku was almost glad for the reminder. It seemed this lesson was about a reality check for everyone. After the last class, that may have been needed for some.
Some of you also have powers that can be dangerous. Izuku really wanted to chuckle there, but doing so would just scare everyone else. In our superhuman society, all quirks are certified and stringently regulated. So we often overlook just how unsafe they can actually be. Please don't forget that if you make the wrong move, your powers can be deadly, even if you're trying to do something virtuous like rescue someone. As everyone looked at the hero in silence, 13 motioned to the erasure hero.
Thanks to Aizawa's fitness test, you all have a solid idea of your quirk's potential. And because of All Might's combat training, you likely experienced how dangerous your powers can be when used against other people. Carry those lessons over to this class. Today, you're going to learn how to use your quirks to save people's lives. You won't be using your powers to attack your enemies or each other. Only to help. After all, that is what being a hero is all about. Ensuring the safety of others. There it was. The bar. The challenge. Using his destructive powers to save and keep things whole, rather than destroy. A tall order for someone known as the Great Slayer. But that's what he needed to do. If he wanted to become the hero he'd always dreamed of, he needed this training. And his blood was pumping with excitement over it. Finally. Something he so desperately needed and wanted to learn. And some hopeful validation to go along with it. Everyone began to cheer and clap as 13 finished her speech. Aizawa let out a sigh, before moving to start the exercise. Before he could, the lights flickered, sparked, then went out. As everyone looked around in confusion, Izuku felt it. He felt the bloodlust pouring out from something. He spun his head to locate it and saw a swirling purple mass appear near the fountain down below at the bottom of the steps that led from the entrance of the USJ to the center. From it, he could see multiple people coming out of it. He knew what they were in an instant. And so did Eraserhead. Everybody don't move. 13. Protect the students. Kirishima was the first besides Aizawa and himself to notice the problem. Hey, what's going on down there? I thought we were rescuing people? When everyone went to move forward, Aizawa snapped at them. Stay back. The other 19 students looked at him in shock as he lifted his goggles over his eyes. Izuku, however, began to growl and felt something snap inside him. That snap became a surging rage as he heard Aizawa's next words, confirming exactly what he already knew. This is real. Those are villains. As Aizawa stared down the villains, Izuku watched carefully, trying to identify the biggest threats. As he was doing so, he saw IT walk out of the portal, and at that point, his decision was made. There, standing next to the villains, despite its altered appearance, was a Hell Knight. And there was no way in Argent Dinur's name he was going to let that thing live another moment. All right. Everyone, Aizawa didn't get to finish his sentence as he heard the sound of metal scraping against metal and shells being loaded into a gun. Everyone heard the telltale sound of a shotgun being cocked, and they turned to look at Midoriya. The slightly intimidating gunmetal green armor suddenly seemed much more terrifying. There were suddenly large blades on his arms, and a gun in his hands. On his left shoulder was a small, cannon-like device that they were sure wasn't there during the combat class. And at his sides were 2 orange glowing runes. Midoriya, what the hell are you doing? Aizawa said. You are not allowed to fight here. I did not ask for your permission. Midoriya's voice shook everyone. They felt the power radiating off of him. It was stronger than it had been in the cafeteria. There, it had felt disappointed, angered, but protective. Here it felt murderous. Violent. And angry. Stay out of my way, and I will take care of this myself. Midoriya, you are my student. This shit is not gonna fly, put the gun away or... That was not a request, Aizawa. Izuku's tone was flat and commanding. Their fate is sealed. I am simply going to show them what that fate is. When they decided to bring hell into this, it became my problem. Aizawa stared at his student in horror. What in Kami's name was he thinking? Was he trying to get himself killed? He moved to capture the rogue student but watched in awe as the blade at his arm extended and he used it to cut his signature capture weapon before it could even wrap around him once. Aizawa then rushed forward to grab the teenager, only to be flipped unceremoniously onto the ground. Not hard, but enough to knock the wind out of him. Before he could say anything more, Midoriya stepped over him and walked calmly down the stairs. Even the villains began to stop and watch as the boy began to emanate this blood-red aura of violence around him. Car. N. Tuck. He whispered once to himself before he began to charge down the stairs. As he got closer to them, he let forth a battle cry he didn't remember. But it felt so powerful and invigorating he couldn't stop himself. Car and tuck, rip and tear, until it is done. Welcome home, Great Slayer. Chapter 6. Symbol of what they fear. Tamura Shigaraki had expected a fight, he had planned on it. He had hoped for it. When he had walked through the portal to see the shivering UA students and the stiff figures of Eraserhead and 13, he'd felt a chill of excitement. However, 2 things overshadowed that. One was that All Might wasn't here like the stupid symbol of peace should be. The second was the Nomu Master had given him. Master had said it would listen to him and do whatever he said. But it wasn't listening anymore. Not since that punk in green armor started walking down the stairs. When the kid had screamed, though, even he had felt it. The power he felt in his voice was uncanny. It was so like what All Might's voice did, but darker, stronger. If he had to put words to it, it felt like rage itself had manifested in the NPC's voice. Oh, so this is a secret boss, then. Nomu, take care of it. The Nomu didn't move. In fact, it only trembled and stared at the approaching figure. Shigaraki felt his own anger rising by the second. But before he could say anything more, he heard a roar that wasn't the Nomu next to him echo across the facility. Car and tuck, rip and tear, until it is done. Kurogiri, go take care of those brats, I have to take care of the glitch.
Shigaraki's voice grated against the very air itself as his irritation built to new levels, watching all the mobs he'd gotten for this fight just freeze up. Kurogiri nodded, disappearing in an instant, and all for one's successor turned to the approaching problem. Stupid fear codes, they shouldn't have come if a simple team could scare the pants off of them.
Then the carnage started. The Doom Slayer had to repeat one thing in his head as the villains in the very front gathered their wits about them. I can't kill them. I'm a hero now. Killing them would only cause problems. He swore he heard multiple voices pushing those thoughts forward to remind him of that detail, begging him to be better than what he had in the pits of hell. And he listened. He did need to be better, but at the same time, there is no rule about breaking their bodies to the point of near death.
One villain finally shook the fear that had laced his bones the moment the armored figure had spoken. He called out to the rest of his comrades as he pointed his barreled fingers at the approaching team's shooting squad. Take your aim and stop him. Who is that guy? Our intel didn't mention anyone like him. A woman with floating gray hair asked as she moved next to the finger gunner.
Quit being a pussy. It's just a kid. What's the worst he could do? A larger, almost Frankenstein-like man asked, pointing his own hands at the Hell resident. The Doomslayer smirked under his helmet. They were about as intimidating as armless imps. That is to say, they were just argent fuel. The moment they fired their quirks at him, he dashed forward, using his own pool of argent energy to get close. Most of the bullets bounced off his armor and he dodged the metal-like hair that shot towards him. The finger gun villain had only a moment to register the intimidating metal-covered warrior in front of him before. Boom. All the villains stared in shock as the man's leg had been shot off by the shotgun residing in the armored man's hands. He screamed as the pain registered, only able to get out a single second of pain screeching before being knocked unconscious quickly by a punch to the face from the metalloid. Taking advantage of the villain's shock, the Slayer grabbed the woman's shoulder, his doom blades piercing through her. Using the leverage the blade provided him, he swung her into the air before bringing her screaming body down onto his knee, breaking her back and knocking her unconscious from the sheer amount of pain her body felt. The Frankenstein-looking monster roared out in anger and tried to punch the Slayer. The villains watched in horror as the hulking figure's fist was simply caught and crushed by the smaller hand of the person he'd been intending to kill. Learn your place, the Great Slayer said, scoffing at the vain attempt before shooting the man's arm off with several quick shots from his shotgun due to the full auto mod. As blood splattered across the ground and the man's shouts of pain filled the air, the Doom Slayer jumped up and punched him into the ground. As he stood over the now three barely breathing villains, he looked up. Anyone else? The Doom Slayer heard shuffling behind him and turned to see who it was. Before he got a clear look of whoever thought it was a brilliant idea to attack him, a gray scarf shot out from the stairs and pulled the four-armed villain into Aizawa's waiting foot. Aizawa was glaring at his student harshly as he moved next to him. You really should leave, Midoriya. Keep this up and there will be consequences. This is my fight more than you realize, Sensei. I am not going anywhere till that thing, and he pointed to the motionless, modified Hell Knight, is dead. Aizawa glared at the teen, before settling into a combat stance. Against my better judgment, I'll let this continue, but we will discuss this at length, as well as your continued stay at UA after this is over. Fair enough. The shotgun was placed behind him and slipped into the dimensional pocket Hayden had developed to carry his arsenal everywhere he went, switched quickly for his heavy cannon. Let us get to work then. To say the other students weren't scared of their classmates' brash actions would be a lie. They were horrified. It started with them fearing the Greenette would die right in front of them. After the first shell hit the ground, though, it turned from fear for the class rep to fear of him. And simply put, he was terrifying. Uraraka watched the onslaught begin silently, all the blood in her body leaving her head. She was sick. This was sick. Deku was a good person, he was a hero. What was he thinking? Why was he killing those villains? The brunette didn't have time to ponder those thoughts as she felt someone pulling her arm. She looked up and could see Ida talking to her, but his words weren't registering. She was in shock. She slowly turned to look at the taller student and realized he was pulling her towards the door. Mechanically, she began to run with him to the exit of the USJ, constantly checking over her shoulder to look at Deku. Would he be alright? Uraraka ran into some of her classmates rather suddenly, and only as she shook her head and looked up did the world around her finally come into focus. She saw a large, mist-covered person standing in front of her and her whole class. As she finally came back to reality, she caught the tail end of what the villain before them was saying. To meet you. We are the League of Villains. The mist seemed to bow slightly before them. I know it's impolite, but we decided to invite ourselves into this haven of justice to say hello. The figure narrowed his glowing, yellow eyes and the mist swirled lightly as he looked past them. Though one must wonder what kind of justice such an institution is teaching its students to dispense with the greeting my comrades have received. Everyone watched the villain quietly. He seemed much bigger than them, and his quirk was intimidating, to say the least. They all stood, tense and in a position to fight at any moment as the villain gave them all a once-over. We had planned on meeting the great symbol of peace with our visit today. I believe he was supposed to be here, and yet there is no sign of his presence at all. It seems there was a change of plans that were not foreseen. Well, in the end, I suppose it doesn't matter. The figure's body began to spread outward and the students grouped up closer to one another. Uraraka just watched all this occur almost blankly. While she could clearly see and hear everything happening before her, it was almost as if it weren't registering that it was real. It felt like she was watching the most involved movie ever. I still have a role to play. Uraraka watched as the Misty Man prepared to act, but Bakugo and Kirishima acted first. The two rushed forward and attacked him, an explosion covering the area in smoke rather quickly. As they waited for the smoke to clear, the two teens stood confidently, ready to continue the fight. As they stood at the ready, Kirishima grinned and said, "Did you think we were just gonna stand around and let you tear this place to shreds?" As they all watched silently, Uraraka couldn't shake the feeling of fear that settled in her chest. There was no way it was that easy. It couldn't be. That's when she heard a voice from behind them. "You live up to your school's reputation, that is certain. But you should be more cautious when you attack one such as I." The villain's voice seemed gloating. "It often can have disastrous results." The mist shot outwards and covered the majority of the students. Uraraka felt the floor beneath her give way and suddenly, the mist disappeared, and she was falling towards water. Eep! She spun herself in midair and touched her chest to make herself weightless. She stopped just above the water's surface. She floated just 5 or so feet away from the water and she looked around to gather her bearings. She could clearly see a ship not too far away, with a large mountain and waterfall behind it. Around the large lake, she saw the stone pathways leading to the different disaster areas, as well as the central plaza and stairs. The bigger problem was, where was she going to go and how was she going to get there? "See, Mir, little girl!" Uraraka screamed as a fish-like figure shot out of the water towards her. She didn't have anything to really turn her in midair and tried desperately to move enough to either dodge him or hit him, but he was directly behind her. Before he could make contact with her, however, a tongue shot out from the water, hitting him right across the face. He fell to the side of the brunette, a dazed look in his eyes before the tongue shot back out and grabbed her, pulling her with whoever it was towards the ship in the middle of the water. While Uraraka was still panicking, her rational mind told her this had to be Sue. Or at least she really hoped it was. When they reached the boat, the tongue moved her above the actual boat and Uraraka released her quirk, letting her drop softly onto the floor. Moments later, a very disoriented Mineta and a frustrated Sue jumped aboard the boat. Though, Mineta was more slammed onto the ship than put there. "Well, this has quickly turned out to be a terrible day of class," Sue said, looking out across the water, where they could see multiple villains beginning to surround the ship. Off in the distance, they could hear the sounds of fighting and gunfire. While it was too far to really tell who was winning, it was pretty clear the gunfire was Deku. Uraraka really hoped he was okay. He'd done something really scary and dangerous when he went to fight those villains and not listen to Aizawa-sensei. She really hoped it would all be okay. "Yeah, today's not going very well, is it?" Uraraka tried to smile but found herself unable to summon the ability to even fake it. Her nerves were keeping her from doing so. So what do we do? I don't know. I really don't want to be here very long. Ribbit. Sue looked out over the waters as she said this, looking worriedly at all the villains who were staring right at the boat. I don't think staying here is going to be safe for very long. Ribbit. What are you two so worried about? Mineta asked. It's not like these guys can take on All Might. And I'm sure he'll find out what's going on here and come kick these guys' butts. It's not like these guys can kill All Might. Something about what Mineta said got Uraraka's mind turning. As she reflected on what she had heard the Mist villain say, something stuck out to her. Wait, didn't the Mist guy say something about them expecting All Might to be here? Mineta and Sue paused for a second before Sue nodded. Yeah, he did. He acted as if they had planned on All Might being here. So, does that mean they have a way to kill All Might? Panic began to worm its way even deeper into Uraraka's chest. It reared its ugly head as her heart began to sink, feeling as if it weighed as much as the I-beams her parents used in construction. She continued. There's no way they'd come here and risk All Might, unless they were prepared, right? They wouldn't want to fight a losing fight. So why are they? What about that monster that came with them? What is it? Why is I there? Did they make it? Can it kill All Might? What do? What do? Uraraka's oncoming panic attack stopped as she felt someone hug her. She blinked a couple of times and felt her coming back to reality. Sue was hugging her. Breath, Uraraka. We'll be okay. Whether the villains have a plan or not, we need to get out of here. The frog girl said slowly. So breath, and just focus on what we can do. Escaping here alive. Uraraka took a couple of deep breaths before nodding. As she looked to the main area, she could still see Deku fighting the massive horde of villains with Aizawa-sensei. Despite his brutality, she wished so desperately to have his ability to act, his courage, his intelligence. A small mantra began to echo in her head. What would Deku do? As Sue tried to keep watch, keep Mineta from grabbing either of them and stop his own panic, Uraraka's mind began to think. How can she fix this? What can she do? Rather than sit there waiting to be saved, what are her options? How can she be a hero like Deku? As she looked at the gathering villains, all of them waiting for the three students to hit the water, a plan, a real plan, began to form. Between the boat, Sue's tongue, Mineta's balls, and her gravity nullification, they could get out of here, and hopefully, keep the villains from chasing them. Sue, Mineta. The two other teens looked at the brunette in surprise. Her voice was no longer shaking. She looked confident, even. I have a plan. Shigaraki couldn't help but scratch his neck as the fight continued. His stupid mobs were getting tossed and torn apart like lame, level 1 tutorial characters. He hated it. He'd hoped they'd at least cause some problems, slow them down, but no, the stupid kid in armor and that bothersome pro-hero were tearing his group of lackeys apart. They were just XP fodder to these two. It irked him. As the last of the villains was knocked unconscious, he let out a long sigh. Next to him, the Nomu tilted its head in questioning, almost as if it were asking to go. Asking if it was its turn to fight. Not yet, Nomu. We need to separate these two, as much as I hate to say it. Two high-level bosses can be annoying to Kite and CC, so might as well just remove one from the equation. Shigaraki spoke more to himself than the Nomu. Master had told him that while it could understand him and take his commands, it wasn't a person and had barely the intelligence of a dog. As if on cue, a mass of swirling purple appeared next to him. Shigaraki looked to Kurogiri briefly before looking back at the two approaching heroes. Aizawa seemed intent on taking Shigaraki while the armored kid hadn't taken his eyes off the Nomu. Odd. Kurogiri, did you kill that hero 13? Sadly, I did not. She is injured to a life-threatening degree, however, and the rest of the students have been scattered across the USJ. They attempted to escape, but sadly they were one person short of such an attempt working as they forgot to hold me down in any way. So I decided to not chance it and send them to find their friends. Good work, Kurogiri. It seems you're more useful than just a ride out of here. Shigaraki grinned underneath the hand on his face. This was turning out rather well. No pros to rescue them. No chance of escape. Now they just had to take out these two and All Might would be devastated for the rest of his life. Or, if he did come to try and save his precious students, the Nomu would be able to kill him. Now, I need you to take that armored kid away from here. He's a secret boss and I'd rather fight him when we deal with the regular boss for this level. Consider it done. Kurogiri nodded before both Shigaraki and Kurogiri surged forward. In any other place, Izuku would have commented to Aizawa how laughable it was that the two villains thought they could take the two of them. However, he knew better than to tempt fate. Along with the fact that his boiling rage kept his throat silent, as it did most times he fought. He stalked forward as the swirling mass of purple mist approached. He had an idea of what this creature could do, and, honestly, he wasn't worried. Portals were the least of the most dangerous powers he'd had to deal with in Hell. It would be the same here. The hand-covered man began to engage Aizawa in CQC, but Izuku tuned them out as the mist began to cover the area, in an attempt obviously to throw him somewhere else. So watching the creature's eyes widen as his armor flared with argent energy and dispersed the portal's shape and pushed the mist back to the man before him, he grinned. The only thing they fear is you. You are not the first to try and move me without my permission. Izuku's voice was gritty and far deeper than his regular voice. At least to the outside world. A benefit of his suit was hiding his body's age. And it sure didn't hurt that it bumped the intimidation factor up tenfold. And you will certainly not be the last. Izuku's hand grabbed the metal brace around the creature's neck, and Izuku could feel hands grasping at him. It seems there actually was a person underneath all that mist. Whoever they were continued to stare at him in shock, as did the two other combatants. How? The creature, a man it seemed, asked, its voice warbly as if it was present in multiple places at once. Which was most likely not far from the truth, due to his quirk. You do not need to know, Izuku said right before he squeezed. The man gasped and choked, eyes getting impossibly large, the mist shooting every which way in an attempt to escape. Aizawa and the blue-haired villain dodged hastily to avoid any of the teleporting tendrils, not knowing where those tendrils may send them. Izuku didn't move an inch, focusing only on squeezing the man's consciousness out of him. Not 30 seconds later, he passed out, and the mist receded to barely outline his form, revealing a well-kept tuxedo suit underneath. Odd choice of dress for a combat zone. Though, in an age full of superheroes and supervillains, compared to real war, it made sense. Nomu. The Hell Knight's head turned to the main villain and Izuku's fist clenched. So this bitch was the one controlling it, huh? Fool. Kill that brat. Aizawa looked panicked and shouted something, but Izuku didn't hear it. No, his emotions had already surged up at seeing the familiar rise of argent energy through the Hell Knight's muscles expand as it readied to leap towards him. He could see as well that its mass had been altered. The idiots had made it stronger. No matter. This was his duty as the Doomslayer. His job. Rip. And tear. Until it is done. The monster roared, and the two collided. All of the USJ heard the collision. Above that, however, they heard the roars of two primal beings crying for the other's blood. Are you sure this is gonna work? Mineta swallowed a large amount of saliva as Uraraka explained her plan. Sue looked slightly worried but overall ready. She'd agreed to the plan. But Mineta had doubts. Like, a lot of them. How on earth was she so sure they could survive this? This was insane. They were going to die, and he'd never get to kiss a girl, goondates, or feel her beautiful, large. Slap, hey. He held his cheek with both hands as he looked at the frog girl in shock and slight arousement. What was that for? You had a pervy look on your face. I did not. Focus, guys, Uraraka said slowly, trying hard to maintain her own confidence. Seeing the bubbly but nervous girl become so confident and self-reliant was kinda hot, Mineta wasn't going to lie. But despite how attractive she was, that did nothing to assuage the fears he had about this plan. Saying it was crazy was putting it mildly. But what other option did they have? Let the villains kill them, eat their corpses, and use their remains for fish nutrients. Okay, maybe he should stop thinking of what horrible things the villains could do to them. It was not helping his anxiety. All right, Uraraka said, as she put both hands on the boat. Her breath was shaky, and it was obvious to him and Sue she was scared she wouldn't be able to do this. Despite himself, he felt his hand reaching out, with how low to the ground and close she was. Sue's tongue slapped him again before he could do anything. "Are ready, guys?" Uraraka asked. Sue simply picked Mineta up, which set his mind racing for a few long seconds before he came back to the real world and two of his balls from off the top of his head. They both nodded to the brunette. Uraraka took a deep breath before making sure all her fingertips were touching the boat. They watched as pink energy began to spread all across the boat. All the villains gathered around and preparing to fight backed away nervously, sticking close to the boat, but all making sure not to touch it or be within 10 feet of it. Everyone watched in awe as the boat was finally covered in the pink light and then it faded. After a few seconds, the entire boat began to rise into the air and the villains began to shout and flounder to react. The boat had risen 30 feet in the air in a matter of seconds. As the villains all began to prepare their own attacks, Uraraka slowly lifted her shaking hands together. Mineta could only stare in awe as she obviously fought to stay conscious. This was far beyond what she should be capable of. And yet, here she was, doing it. All because she wanted to save her friends. It hurt to watch the tears streaming down her cheeks, her blood vessels bulging against her hero suit. At that moment, he felt no pervy thoughts enter his mind. Only pure, unadulterated respect and worry. This was the epitome of being a hero. This girl was showing him what it really meant to be a hero. He gripped the two purple balls in his hands. He was a coward and he hated it. Hated himself so much for it.
Slowly, after water and other projectiles began flying toward the boat, Uraraka's hands came together and she muttered a weak, release. The pink energy flared around the boat before shattering and gravity returned in an instant.
And with it went Uraraka's consciousness. As Uraraka passed out, Sue jumped off the falling object and Mineta acted like a hero for the first time in his life. He shouted, screamed, and threw every ball he could off his head. Even as the boat crashed into the water, its broken self-shattering and sending debris everywhere, creating a large whirlpool, he threw everything he could at the villains, hoping to any that weren't knocked unconscious from the falling boat in his own quirk. He had to try. For the girl who was a real hero, for Uraraka. Uraraka felt herself being carried when she returned to consciousness. She looked bleary-eyed at the world around them. She could hear water around them, and she could see green, muted grays, blue, water, purple, and soft, blackish-green hair. As she slowly blinked a couple more times, she realized how sore she truly was. Everything hurt. Everything ached and screamed at her. She'd overdone it, and she was pretty sure the liquid dripping out of her nose was not snot. Sue was carrying her slowly and quietly near the edge of the shipwreck zone. They were on the shallow part near the central plaza. As her vision cleared and she was more aware of what was going on, she wanted to ask what had happened, but on seeing both Sue and Mineta's faces still, she looked to where their gaze was directed. There, in the central plaza, was Deku, fighting the horrible monstrosity that the villains had brought with them. Nearby, Aizawa and the blue-haired villain were also fighting. The fight between Aizawa and the blue-haired villain was obviously not going well. They could see that the other villain was bruised in multiple places and missing a hand on his arm, while Aizawa's right elbow looked ashen, as did his left shoulder. Both were so focused on their own fight, they didn't notice the three students not 30 feet from them, in plain sight. Now, the fight between Deku and the monster almost made Uraraka think of those battles between kaijus and mechas in that movie Pacific Rim. Their hits were far quicker than that of those movies, but the impacts shook the entire area. Deku ducked and dove between hits, alternating between using his own fists and firing shell after shell into the monster. And no matter how many bullets tore it to pieces, it seemed to regrow its flesh and come back harder and stronger at the armored teen. It was horrifying, disgusting, and yet, oddly familiar. Why? Uraraka didn't have time to think about that as two things happened at about the same time. First, the unconscious mist man awoke and surged his mist forward to cause the thing Deku was fighting to barely avoid its head being blown off by a point-blank shotgun blast. Second, the doors to the USJ suddenly blew open and Uraraka heard a shout. It sounded like Iida. "I'm getting help. Everyone keep fighting." "Damn it, Kurogiri." The villain fighting Aizawa cursed as a small, sad smile spread across their sensei's face. "You had one job." "I'm sorry, Shigaraki." The Mistman, Kurogiri, said as the mist began to hide his well-dressed body like he had sent them all across the USJ. "Useless. It seems like this entire attack was pointless." Shigaraki complained as both Deku and Aizawa still stood ready to fight. The creature stood stock still behind Shigaraki, and Kurogiri moved to stand next to him as well. Back to the title screen. "And I was so looking forward to beating this level today." Shigaraki began to scratch his neck violently and Uraraka could see scars along his neck where he'd obviously scratched too hard on one occasion or another. "Let's go home." Mineta, Sue, and Uraraka all gasped in surprise. All this terror, the effort, and the danger they'd faced, and the villains were just going to leave after Iida went for help. It seemed almost too good to be true. However, Uraraka couldn't help but notice the growl of frustration that came from Deku. Why? Wasn't this a good thing? Didn't the villains leaving mean they would be safe? Why did he sound so angry at the idea? Was it because of the monster? She didn't have time to contemplate those thoughts as she heard Shigaraki speak again. "But before we go, let's make sure the symbol of peace is broken." The villain turned directly to the three of them. "Let's break his pride." No. Both Izuku and Aizawa stepped forward to try and stop Shigaraki, but the creature and Kurogiri stopped them both respectively. She watched in horror as Kurogiri used a portal to cause one of the creature's fists to slam Aizawa into the ground and Shigaraki's hand approached her fast. She wasn't sure what it did, but if Aizawa's cracked arm and shoulder were a clue, it wasn't good. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. She wanted to move, but her body didn't listen. Instead, she could only watch in terror as life was about to. Two thunderous booms echoed across the USJ simultaneously. One was an echoing rifle shot, and Shigaraki's hand blew open, now blooded and unusable. The second was the sound of bone impacting metal and Izuku's body went flying, cratering into the stairs. As Shigaraki screamed in pain, grasping his bloodied hand, Sue and Mineta retreated quickly. But Uraraka could only stare at the still body of Deku. His suit was dented, despite how invincible it seemed before. How strong was the monster? In Deku's hands was a large assault rifle, smoke still rising from the barrel. Deku had chosen against dodging the attack and fighting the monster to save her. He'd chosen her life over his own. No. Shigaraki glared at the green metal armor in the crater. "Kill him, Nomu." "Deku!" Uraraka screamed. Izuku looked around the darkness. It was odd to be here. He'd only seen his mindscape once before, but that hadn't been a pleasant experience. Though, considering he'd been knocked unconscious and maybe in the middle of dying to a very strong, overpowered Hell Knight, he couldn't say this scenario was worse than the first time. "So you are finally here." Izuku turned to see a scrawny-looking man standing before him. "It seems your unquelled rage has finally died enough for us to speak." "And who are you exactly?" Izuku asked. He was curious, obviously. Why had this man been looking to speak to him for so long? "I am the first holder of One for All, and we have much to discuss. While I do have some questions to ask you all, chief among them being since when could I talk to those who had wielded One for All, I am probably about to die and would love to try and stop that. If I don't, that Hell Knight will kill everyone in there. And that is what we need to discuss. We have roughly an hour here to talk before the Nomu will reach you, so let's discuss the reason you came here in the first place. You're fighting that Hell Knight, and your actions overall." The first began to slowly walk towards Izuku, some purpose gleaming in his eyes. "Why do you want to become a hero?" "What? Why did you want to become a hero?" Why do you want to become a hero? Izuku paused at the question. He'd thought about it briefly here and there, but most honestly, it felt natural to want to become a hero. Fighting to save others had been what he'd known for so long. Stopping those with evil intent and hurting them before they could hurt the innocent was instinctual at this point. Izuku went to open his mouth and voice his thoughts when the first raised his hand. I can hear your thoughts, I already know your thought process. I understand, and while it worked in hell, that will not work here. Do you even remember, after all these years, why All Might chose you to inherit our power? The question shook Izuku to his core. Could he remember why he'd wanted to become a hero? Could he remember what had started him on this path? Before he fell into hell, before he fought every demon in existence, before he became so violent and angry at the atrocities he'd seen, what had inspired quirkless, useless him to be a hero? His memories flashed before him as some other force began to push those instances back to the forefront of his mind. Specifically, his first time telling All Might he wanted to be a hero, and All Might telling him he believed in him.
Ever since I was a kid, I've thought saving people was the coolest thing you could do. I want people to see my fearless smile and be safe. And be the kind of hero everyone looks up to.
I couldn't just stand there and watch you die, young man, you too can become a hero. Izuku reached up to his face and felt honest tears began to run down his cheeks. He hadn't cried since Blaskowitz died. He knew, he remembered. I wanted to save people. I wanted to make people feel safe. It's the one thing that made me want to be a hero again. The feeling that I could finally arrive on time and save people before they died, rather than just be the sword of vengeance. The first simply smiled. Good. That's good. That is the Midoriya that we wanted to be the ninth holder. That is the Midoriya Izuku that All Might chose. So prove us right, and use our quirk for what it is. Stop using your anger as your source of power. Argent energy is fueled by emotions, yes, but your anger isn't the only emotion that can fuel it. We had to force your anger to cease so you wouldn't become a mindless machine of vengeance as you were before. That's why you couldn't use us. The first took a step forward and placed his fist on Izuku's chest. Make us proud, and show your classmates, show the world that there is a new symbol. A symbol of safety. A symbol of peace. A sentinel and guardian, just as you used to be, on Argent Dinner.
That name sounded so familiar to Izuku, but he couldn't place where he'd heard it before. He wanted to ask but felt himself returning to reality. And with it, he felt a surge of strength as a new emotion spread across his body. Devotion, determination, and a feeling of protectiveness. He couldn't lose here. Not when, for the first time, he actually had people standing behind him. He wouldn't fail now. He was the Doom Slayer, the ninth holder of One for All, and above all, a hero.
Uraraka's scream was answered as the creature went to crush Deku's head. Before it could make contact with him, a large explosion shook it off course, before ice covered it entirely. She looked to the side to see their classmates all gathering together. Kirishima and Tokiyami had Kurogiri pinned down while Bakugo had blasted the monster into Todoroki's ice blast. An invisible force was lifting Aizawa's limp form and carrying it up the stairs. Uraraka felt like she could cry as Shigaraki growled. Her classmates were all here, alive, and standing strong before such a terrifying danger.
Nice try, handjob, but we're not letting you do that. Bakugo's grin was somehow inspiring in this moment of despair. Todoroki glared at the still figure of Shigaraki who was surrounded by the rest of her class, all ready to jump at a moment's notice. Even Mineta had two of his hair balls in his hands, ready to go despite his bleeding scalp. You brats are supposed to be fodder. Why are you causing so much trouble? Just die like the XP mobs you are.
Shigaraki yelled as the ice shattered. Everyone looked in shock as the creature roared and stomped across the ground, intent on crushing Todoroki. Bakugo jumped into action, only to get backhanded. No one would be able to get close enough in time as the creature shattered. A surge of ice Todoroki shot out. They all could only watch as it moved to smash him underneath its bone-covered hands. There was a surge of green lightning near the stairs and suddenly, the incoming fist stopped. They all were in shock as Deku stood there, arms crossed in front of him, blocking the blow. His helmet had been taken off to reveal a bloodied lip, but otherwise normal-looking face. His hair was still cut short, but his eyes had a bright glow to them as lightning sparked around him, his normal red energy seeming to attach itself to the lightning. "I do not think we finished earlier," he grinned as he reared back his own fist and slammed it into Nomu's chest. Its rib cage shattered and it ragdolled across the ground. It stood up quickly as Shigaraki snarled. "No, you stupid, cheating, secret boss. You're not supposed to have a second stage." "Like I care," he shouted back. Izuku looked to Bakugo. "Bakugo, I need you to get everyone out of here. Can you do that?" "Like hell I will. I'm not leaving you to fight that alone. Are you shitting me?" Bakugo asked, almost looking offended. "Please just do it. I am the only one right now who can fight this thing." "All the more reason for us to help. You didn't exactly have it handled earlier," Bakugo said, his hands beginning to crackle from the small explosion surrounding them. "Besides, we..." "Kachan." Bakugo stilled at the name, and Uraraka realized there was something behind that name. Something important. "Please." Bakugo stared at Izuku for a long moment before letting out a displeased snort. "Fine. Knock out Misty, stupid hair, and let's get moving." "Right." Kirishima and Tokiyami both hit Kurogiri hard before he could recover. Shigaraki moved to attack, only to be cut off by a large surge of ice, which surrounded him. Todoroki kept the ice coming as all the students began to rush up the stairs. He glared at Izuku, who never took his eyes off the rising Nomu. "You'd better know what you're doing." Izuku just laughed. "Despite how surprising this may sound, this is not my first rodeo," Izuku said as his body shifted into a combat stance. "I know what I am doing." And with that, in a burst of electricity, he appeared in front of the Nomu, punching it again. The fight began anew, but this time, despite the cracking and denting in his armor, Izuku felt no need to stop. He felt stronger, faster, tougher than he ever had before, and he could feel the difference one for all made within him. He was obviously far stronger than he ever had been before, but his mind was also clearer. It was sharper, thinking faster. His body responded dozens times faster than he was used to. It moved quicker than any demon he'd ever fought, and most importantly, he felt determined. He would not lose here. Period. End of discussion. As Shigaraki shouted and began to crack the ice surrounding him, Todoroki's body slowly freezing from the constant effort of keeping him trapped and away from Izuku. Izuku felt a large, confident smile begin to grow on his face. Despite the pain in his body as he could feel the hits finally going through his armor and impacting against bare skin, he didn't stop. "Listen up, you modified Hell Knight. I am going to teach you something All Might told me a long time ago. Something I'd forgotten for a long time, myself." Izuku's words were followed by a large axe kick, pushing it deep into the ground. As it pulled itself out and tried to strike back, Izuku ducked under the blow, grabbed its arm, and flipped it over his shoulder. The resulting crater covered nearly half of the plaza. A hero's duty is to save people and help them feel safe. Another kick back into the ground. To feel protected. A punch backward, sending it skidding once again. And to make sure that when your back is against the wall when all hope is lost, you echo only 4 words. Izuku ripped off its arms to keep it from fighting back for this brief moment as he pulled back for a large haymaker. Electricity seemed to surround his entire arm, the lightning becoming a mix of green and red, eventually lighting up the entire plaza. Go beyond. Plus. Ultra. Everyone watched in awe as Izuku's fist impacted against the Nomu. Electricity flew everywhere before there was an explosion of power. The shockwave from the hit knocked everyone to the ground and shattered any of the remaining ice, as well as all the glass in the entirety of the USJ. Everyone watched as the lightning and pure strength literally tore the Nomu apart, its arms and legs disintegrating before its half-destroyed torso and head rocked into the sky and blew through multiple clouds, eventually disappearing out of sight. All stared in awe at the display of pure strength and power. That level of power was that of All Might himself, if not greater. And standing there, victorious, bloodied, and somehow still smiling, was Izuku Midoriya. His armor broken and torn apart, his weapons cracked at his feet, he stood with his fist raised high, smiling for his classmates to see. The Doomslayer, the ninth holder of One for All, was ready to show the world that he was here. Chapter 7. R&R, Repercussions and Revelations. It hurt to move. Fighting some demonic amalgamation of super strength and a Hell Knight was not easy, and with the lack of Argent energy he'd been getting since he'd gotten here, his suit had been running low anyway. But that wouldn't have mattered much against that thing. It had hit just as hard as the Icon of Sin, and that was saying something. And yet, he'd matched it. No, he'd surpassed it. It was breathtaking, invigorating even to realize that. One for All took his normal abilities and boosted them to 1000. He felt free. Both from his anger and from the frustrating limitations he'd always felt he had. Izuku slowly lowered his fist and turned, eyes still lit up by One for All's electric energy that flowed through his veins. It was the main reason he could still move. If he stopped using it, he'd probably fall over unconscious by now. He knew some of his ribs were cracked, and though killing that Hell Knight had helped him heal some, it wasn't enough to be fully okay. He turned to look directly at Handjob and Portal Freak. He couldn't remember if they'd said their names or not, and despite the fact his main instinct was to protect, he couldn't deny the anger that still resided in his soul at how they'd attempted to hurt his classmates. That's one down. You two care for round 2? Or are you going to be smart and leave while you still can? Izuku knew he couldn't push for another fight. He was too drained, too hurt to do so. But the fact that he'd not only defeated their trump card but destroyed the entirety of the ceiling of the USJ along with it left him feeling good about his chances of scaring them. He hoped the image of him scooping of his shotgun and idly popping 2 more shells into it put the fear of Icon into them. The gray-haired one began to scratch madly at his neck with his one good hand, the other hanging limply at his side. No. A stupid kid beat me. This wasn't the script. He isn't even All Might. Shigaraki glared at the destroyed ceiling where his no move had been sent flying, sure to never be seen again. He cheated. He cheated, cheated. Seeing no action from the 2 villains, Izuku took a gamble and approached them. Don't tell me you're afraid of me. Shigaraki took 2 steps back in shock as Izuku glared at him. This stupid secret boss is still able to keep going. No, that's not fair. This was supposed to be level 1. I didn't sign up for nightmare mode. Shigaraki ranted within his mind. He looked to the base of the steps where 3 other students were coming down, looking like they were ready to help. Damn it. I didn't want to retreat here. We've barely even put a chink in that stupid, smiling bastard's pride, unless. Kurogiri. Shigaraki grinned from underneath the hand on his face. Take care of those 3 mobs. I don't think we can leave a secret boss like this around for it to level up later. Better to take care of it now, right? Of course, Shigaraki. A wise course of action, with how hurt he seems to be. Izuku flinched. He could feel the difference in his intimidating figure without his rage. They weren't scared of him like they were before. They weren't terrified by his very visage and voice. He was going to have to learn how to do that with One for All active. And he couldn't risk losing himself to rage right now. The strength and speed decrease could mean the death of not only himself but some of his classmates. Blood dripped down his fingers as he gripped them tightly. Round 2 it is, Izuku said, slowly raising his gun. Shigaraki lifted his one good hand and prepared to charge as Kurogiri's form spread out to surround Bakugo, Kirishima, and Todoroki. The 3 of them fell into their combat stances, sweat dripping down their faces. Everyone stood still, waiting for the others to make a move. A standoff, but where the villains had the advantage. The longer they waited, the more of the weaker villains woke up, at least those that were knocked out by Eraserhead and the other students.
Near the entrance, everyone stood still as they saw the standoff happening down in the main courtyard area.
They were too far away to do anything, and many of them were too scared or too tired to run down there to help. Uraraka herself wanted to move, was screaming at her body to move, but it was still down for the count. She could only lean against the still body of Suyu and stare at Deku, praying to Kami above that he'd be okay. Out of her peripheral vision, she saw a shadow appear from outside the USJ and fly through the now destroyed ceiling, right towards Deku. Detroit smash. Shigaraki's eyes widened as a sudden gale force wind threw him across the ground. Kurogiri's mist was scattered in an instant and he too crashed into the fountain, sending stone and water everywhere. There was a visible crater that formed on the ground as a large, imposing figure was suddenly in front of the wounded Slayer. The growing fear and worry that had been building up in their stomachs dissipated as it seemed the sun began to literally appear and shine brightly into the USJ. Any villains still conscious felt any fleeting hope of victory disappear in an instant. All Might had arrived. You have a lot of nerve, attacking my students in my own alma mater, villains. All Might's grin was anything but friendly. He seemed angry, and probably would be far more furious if one thing weren't pushing against that emotion with all its might. Despite his late arrival, he'd seen his protege, his student, his choice to take up his mantle, stand despite the pain and prove who he was. And he wasn't going to let this moment fall by the wayside. Young Midoriya deserved this moment, and these villains would learn how much their mistake would hurt if it was the last thing he did.
No. No. Why now? If only the Nomu were still here. We could've. Shigaraki screamed and broke the ground underneath him. He spun towards the mist next to him. Get us out of here, Kurogiri. We need to leave, now. Of course, Shigaraki. With All Might here, it would be safest to retreat. We must return to Master and report.
Shut up. You're lucky you're an important NPC, or I would have killed you already. Just get us out of here. Seeing the mist villains swell and surround Shigaraki, All Might dashed forward and attempted to hit them. Oh no, you don't. Texas smash. The air visibly warped around All Might's fist and destroyed the concrete below him. It tore towards the two, only to get there half a second too late. The villains faded from reality, leaving only their lackeys behind. Taking a breath to glare at the place where they'd disappeared, All Might huffed and turned to his protege. Young Midoriya was staring at him, the gun now at his sound, breathing heavily, but a smile still on his face. He was hurt, that much was obvious. But he looked happy, proud even. The electric energy surrounding him was slowly fading, as was the argent red energy All Might had grown accustomed to seeing surround young Midoriya when he fought. Hey, All Might. Young Midoriya fell forward and All Might caught him, helping him keep from collapsing to the ground. Finally figured out how to use one for all. It was hard to remember at this moment that the boy before him was a seasoned soldier and war veteran. He looked so much younger with a genuine smile on his face. It felt pretty good. I'm glad it did, young Midoriya, you did well today. That's good. Didn't do so hot at first, might get into a little bit of trouble for that. He commented dryly. All Might just laughed. While I can't condone your actions, I expected this, nor do I blame you. You did your best, young Midoriya. It just means we'll have to train that habit out of you. His protege snorted, as his eyes began to close. Yeah, 'cause you can just train out 300 years of habit and experience. Young Midoriya, if you've taught me anything, you can learn anything and change any habit if you put enough determination into it. As long as you sincerely try. I doubt there's a thing in this world that could stop you. Those words hit Izuku to his core. He'd never felt like he'd taught All Might anything. And with him having to redevelop the relationship they once had, it felt amazing to sit there and realize his previous mentor figure saw him sincerely as not only his student but as an equal in some aspects. His eyes brightened even as they closed. Thanks, All Might. And Izuku's eyes closed shut, letting him get some much-needed rest. It took over an hour to gather together the scattered students and detain all the villains in the USJ. Or at least, put them in handcuffs. With the glaring, terrifying visage of All Might present, not a single one dared to make a break for it or put up a fight. As they were being detained and the students treated, there was one question among the students of 1A. Hey, All Might? The number one hero turned to look at a nervous-looking Kirishima who scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Yes. What is it, young Kirishima? What's gonna happen to Midoriya? When All Might didn't immediately answer, instead of looking over to the ambulance where the ninth wielder was being treated by Recovery Girl, Kirishima stumbled and began to explain more. I mean, when the villains first showed up he was like, super terrifying. It was manly, don't get me wrong, but he just seemed like he snapped. Then he went and started shooting a bunch of the villains, and I know Snipe does that and all, but it just seemed more violent and grotesque than a hero should be. He got better, later though, like when he fought that giant monster, but I understand what you mean, young Kirishima, and I don't think you need to be as worried as you are. Your care for your classmate is a heroic trait, but young Midoriya will be fine on his own. All Might knew the hardening student wasn't the only one to be asking that question, nor the only one to be paying attention to his answer, as many of the nearby students visibly sighed in relief at his response. But that left another question to be answered. Or maybe two questions together. What had made Midoriya snap like that? And what made him so angry in the first place? The teachers' meeting room was quiet as they all sat on what they'd learned from Eraserhead. It was 4 days after the attack on the USJ, and the students had been given a week's leave to allow the school to reform its security and allow those involved to recover. But there was more to it than that. The biggest detail, after increasing security, had been reviewing the case of one potentially dangerous student, Izuku Midoriya. I must ask you all to be completely honest with me when I ask this, Nezu said, any hint of playfulness in his voice gone. Were any of you aware of the weaponry that Izuku Midoriya carried on his person? No, Eraserhead spoke first. Checking the designs he gave me, and looking at his suit from the outside, there's nowhere for such a big arsenal to be hidden. You've all seen the recordings of our past combat classes, he carries no visible weapons on him. And yet, during the USJ attack, multiple people can confirm seeing Izuku wielding 3 different weapons, 2 of which are in our custody for the moment. An automatic combat shotgun, a double-barreled shotgun with some form of meat-hook launcher attached to it, and a heavy automatic rifle. All of which are models that we've never seen be produced by any military, and the serial numbers match no currently registered firearms. Having given the shotgun and the rifle a look over, Snipe said, I can say that those things were not designed to maim or even kill. Both are loaded with ammunition built to pierce through most kinds of body armor. The shotgun holds specialized buckshot made out of tungsten, while the heavy automatic rifle contains 50 caliber explosive ammunition, also made of tungsten. The only reason that villain covered in hands still has his right hand is because the bullets were designed to explode when they took a harder impact than human flesh and bone. Snipe sighed as he leaned back, putting his feet up on the table. To put it simply, those bullets weren't designed like a normal bullet. They were designed to guarantee that whatever you shoot is not able to stand back up again. It's a miracle none of them died, Mike commented idly. It was close, Recovery Girl said, shaking her head. 2 of them have fallen into medically induced comas to keep their bodies from bleeding to death or dying from the shock of how much pain they were in. Oh. Present Mike paled. Where did a student get their hands on such violent firearms? Vlad King asked as he stared at what little the cameras inside the USJ had recorded onto their black boxes. The better question is who taught them to use them. Powerloader added. Weapons like that aren't something even a firing range in America is gonna let you handle. That's military grade, if not higher. And yet, Midoriya seemed pretty comfortable with using them. Yes, it is indeed very strange. Nezu nodded, before turning to the one teacher who'd remained quiet during the discussion. All Might, you were the one to say you'd helped him receive the armor he used for his hero suit. I would greatly appreciate your input and answer to my question. Did you know about the firearms that Midoriya had? Every teacher felt a chill go down their spine as Nezu spoke. Most knew the principal to be calm at the best of times, jovial even. He was often seen laughing or teasing both students and teachers alike. And yet, right now, there wasn't a single smile on his face. His eyes contained no mirth or curiosity. Only a cold, intimidating look. It took All Might a minute to remember how to breathe. Yes. Yes, I did. There was an immediate uproar at this. Multiple teachers shot to their feet and began to shout at the number 1 hero. Most notably, Aizawa's glare became harsh as he stared down the number one hero. And you didn't care to inform me, or take them away from him, or warn him the consequences of having, let alone using those weapons? Aizawa asked, his voice simmering slightly with anger. I should have warned you, yes. That is my fault. All Might nodded. However, I felt no need to warn him of the dangers such weapons provided and felt they would be safest in his hands before anyone else. Aizawa scoffed, while everyone else stared wide-eyed at the blonde hero. Forgive me if this is calloused and rude, All Might, but has your constant fighting perhaps damaged your mind? Ectoplasm asked. I would agree, Cementos added. We only allow third and fourth years who've proved their ability to use such weapons safely to have live ammunition, and every firearm wielded by a student to be registered with the support course and kept there for safekeeping until they're proven responsible enough to have such things with them after they receive their provisional license. Yes. That is the normal procedure. And both I and Midoriya hoped to discuss such things shortly, but we hadn't expected him to find himself in need of using such weaponry so early on into the school year. That doesn't change the fact that you lied to us, Midnight pointed out. Why? Yes, please do tell us, All Might. Nezu's voice left no room for argument. There would be an explanation, and even that would not guarantee safety from the Chimera's wrath. All Might took a deep breath. He'd had Izuku prepare some things ahead of time. Now it was time to show his student that he was there to protect and help him. He wasn't about to let Izuku get expelled because he took action. Yes, it was violent. Yes, that needed to change. Yes, it was excessive. Those were all facts. But it was also a fact that Izuku had taken the actions he felt were necessary to defend his classmates from a perceived threat. And, if Izuku was to be believed, a modified Hell Knight was good enough reason to fall back into some old habits, if only just a little. All Might leaned forward as he pulled a small USB from his pocket. Everyone leaned forward as he passed the black stick to Nezu. The answers to such questions are contained within this. I simply ask that nothing you see today, nothing, leaves this room. Young Midoriya has given me his expressed permission to share this information with you, and I would rather not betray his trust. Nezu stared at the information stick skeptically. The violent behaviors Izuku Midoriya had shown at the USJ were not to be condoned, and he doubted anything All Might could show him would change those thoughts. But he also saw the potential Midoriya had to be a great, if not the greatest, hero to exist. And he wanted to trust that the number one hero had not lied to him maliciously. He believed that he and Toshinori had a better relationship than that. We will see. And he plugged in the USB stick. To say that Midnight was horrified was an understatement. For the last 2 hours, they had seen a recap of what was the last 300 years of Izuku Midoriya's life. She'd seen him in class and, while very serious and mature, had seemed like a good kid and found him to be fairly well put together. The past 4 days had her questioning his sanity. Now she was questioning both her own and wondering how one human being, one teenager, could be so strong as to not shatter into a million pieces after experiencing even a piece of what Izuku had. It was horrifying to come to understand the reality of fighting literal demons for years, only to be surrounded with death, carnage, and endless violence, all with a hope that feels impossible that one day, it would all be worth it and come to an end. From the fight against hordes of demons to the battle against the Machirs to his duel against the icon of sin. All of it seemed far more brutal and world-ending than any fight she had been involved in. Silence reigned within the meeting room. No one could speak. Some had nearly vomited at the level of gore they'd seen. It was all too apparent now where Midoriya's violence came from. It was a survival instinct, ingrained into him at the deepest level possible. Does that help clear things up? All Might asked. Midnight wanted to laugh. Clear things up? Clear things up? This just made her want to hug Midoriya and never let him see the outside world again. This made her want to cry herself to sleep. This did not make her feel better. It just made her go from seeing a student as a potential threat to a victim of the cruelest fate imaginable. How can we let him come back? Aizawa asked. All Might's head whipped over to the sleep-deprived teacher. But Nomori couldn't find it within herself to disagree with him. I'm no longer saying he's a threat. I can see his desire to protect people is engraved into his very being. But, doesn't he deserve rest? I feel like I can't safely say I want to throw him back into the fray without some form of time to regain his sense of self and get some respite.
Ah, well, you see. All Might didn't have an argument for that. And the R-rated hero couldn't be more torn. She wanted Aizawa to win. To let this kid know, this hero earned some well-deserved time off to finally live a life outside of violence, war, crime, and pain. But another part of her protested that the kid wouldn't accept it. She wouldn't, after all. And he had been at this game a lot longer than she had. As much as I wanna agree with you, Aizawa, I believe that would only end up hurting him. Everyone turned to the previously quiet hound dog, who stood there staring at the still form of Izuku Midoriya, his head camera pointed at his still form which sat on the corpse of the icon of sin.
He seemed to be kneeling before it and paying the fallen demon some form of respect. I ain't the best at guessing without meetin' it is who I'm talking about, but from my experience, taking a hero out of hero work after they've been through some only make things worse. They get antsy, they get angry, they blame themselves for failing, and above all, they grow depressed. No one said anything as those thoughts filtered through their minds. The in-school counselor continued. Not saying the kid hasn't earned a break. But UA is the best place for him to get it. It'll provide him a place to learn how to live like a normal person again without talking everything he's used to away from him. He needs some form of stability. And training to be a hero is supposed to do that? Aizawa questioned. Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Grumpy Case here. How's training stability for the young listener? 'Cause it gives him a way to adapt. To change from the constant need to violence to learning how to turn it on and off. And a safe spot to learn how much is acceptable. Be honest, if we threw him back into society, right now, how long do you think it is? Guns or not before he kills someone defending someone else? They all paled at that thought. Between what they'd seen from the USJ and what they'd seen just now, they were all positive that one wrong day, one poor choice by a villain and Izuku Midoriya would either be a vigilante and wanted or arrested for murder. Potentially both. I'm not saying the kid's a bad kid. He looks like he's got a good head on his shoulders. But he needs to learn the norms again or he ain't gonna be safe to let roam free. And I doubt throwing him in a mental hospital is much reward for fighting for 300 years to save a world that ain't her own. I must agree. Nezu finally added his piece after everything. But I want him to know that this behavior is not acceptable. I believe some extra training to grind out those habits would be best. And turning in the rest of his weaponry and modifying his armor with the support course would greatly ease my nerves. Both for his sake and for the villains he may face. That seems agreeable. I only hope you can find someone who'd be able to handle modifying such equipment. All Might nodded. As he stood up, his form shifted to his buff form. If that is everything, I will be off to tell young Midoriya. Is there anything else you wish for me to tell him? Yes. Tell him he now will be meeting with Hound Dog once a week to make sure his mental health is stable. I do not doubt his desires, but I doubt anyone could walk out of such a place like that and not be a little cracked. I'd agree with that. All the other teachers chorused. Of course. I imagine he'll be okay with that. All Might moved to the door and left. Nezu stared at the closed door in silence before turning to the other teachers. I would like to add a new task for you, Aizawa. Figures, Aizawa muttered under his breath, before nodding to the chimera. Keep an eye out on the students Midoriya interacts with. It would do us good to find those we can truly trust amongst them to assist in helping Midoriya reacclimate to human society once again. Aizawa let out a deep breath before replying. Sure, I can take care of that. Excuse me for asking Principal Nezu, but who are we planning on helping teach Midoriya how to become less violent? There aren't many heroes who have experiences with such things, Midnight pointed out. Nezu simply grinned. Well, lucky for us there's a rising hero that needs a bit of a spotlight. One who before her rise to fame had a habit of fighting in illegal fighting rings that were known for their brutality and to the death nature. And yet now, she's one of the most beloved heroines amongst our ranks. Nezu began to laugh as multiple different plans began to form in his head. It was funny how quickly the depressive, Serious atmosphere shattered as the teacher's nerves were set on edge by his laughs. It was a week after the USJ, and Izuka was walking through the halls of UA alone. He'd been informed by All Might the decision his teachers had come to. And while he felt uncomfortable handing over his arsenal, he'd eventually agreed once they'd all sworn that not a single person besides himself would be allowed to fire even a single shot from any of those weapons. It was hard to give them up not till they could find a good reason for him to get them back or a way to modify them to be less effective. Which was bothersome, but it was something he knew he was going to have to do. Killing a villain, while something a hero can do, was frowned upon unless in the most desperate of circumstances. He knew there would be a vitriolic response to his actions if he kept down the path he was going. And that thought worried him, not because he cared about what the public would say, but he did care about what his classmates would say. He cared about what they would think of him, though he was loath to admit it. They were the first people in a long time he could truly let the walls down around and be a bit of the young Izuku Midoriya that still clung to him even after everything he'd been through. Thinking about his classmates, he wondered how they felt after the USJ. Both Iida and Uraraka seemed to be worried about him if the 70 texts total he'd received from the two of them were any indication, but that was no guarantee. Probably. But the others, he wasn't sure. Well, except for one. The one person he hadn't expected to talk with or hear from for a while at least. As he headed to the support course, his broken armor in hand, weapons in his pocket dimension, he thought back on the encounter he'd had with his previous childhood friend and bully, Katsuki Bakugo. To say his mother could flood a small village with her tears would be a fairly accurate statement. When she heard he'd been injured, she'd cried so much there was a permanent stain on the carpet. Then, when she found how he got hurt and what he'd fought, well, Izuku learned that replacing the carpet by hand costs roughly 27,330 yen. Not a fun experience. Regardless, he was now properly resting at the orders of Recovery Girl. Say what you will, but from the little time he had with the squads he worked with on Mars, medics were often the scariest and the last person you wanted to make angry. He liked living and being healthy, thank you, and he was going to keep it that way. So, here he sat, once again trying to get back to being good at video games. He used to be pretty good from what little he can remember. It was one of the only things he could do at home where he didn't risk getting beaten up by Bakugo and his friends. Now though, he had the hand-eye coordination of a machine. His reflexes were beyond that of any pro hero, and his mind was as sharp as a marauder's axe. And yet, he wasn't quite what he used to be, if not better yet. He couldn't get why though. Ding dong, that was new. Izuku looked to his mother, obviously asking non-verbally if she'd been expecting someone. When she shook her head as she blew her nose, still trying to calm down after yet another scare, he raised an eyebrow. That was odd then. He paused his game and made his way to the door and opened it. It took him a second to process who was standing on the other side of the door. Bakugo, he said, blinking in surprise. What are you doing here? Bakugo went to say something angry-sounding in response, but he stopped before he even finished the first word. After taking a few breaths and trying a few times to speak, eventually, Bakugo shoved his hands into his pockets. Look, I know you probably don't want to talk, but I just needed to say this, okay Deku? Izuku raised an eyebrow. This was a much calmer first sentence than he expected. Bakugo didn't even swear. Progress? All right. Go ahead. Bakugo took a very deep breath, let it out, breathed in again, looked Deku right in the eyes, and said, I'm sorry for being a piece of shit for the past 10 years.
It was Izuku's turn to stare. And stare he did, for about 15 seconds before he stepped out of the house fully and closed the door behind him. Bakugo flinched as the door clicked into place, but didn't shrink under the taller Verdunette's gaze.
You have my attention. Why are you apologizing now? This timing seems rather, conveniently like you don't want to end up like those villains at the USJ if you'll excuse my crassness. Bakugo snorted. Hey, they got what was coming to them. I'm probably the last person in line who's gonna have an issue with how you dealt with them. But, remember what happened that first combat class? Izuku's eyes narrowed. Are you looking for a reason to make me get angry at you? Bakugo laughed. After all the shit I've done to you, I doubt I could do much more to you that would make it worse, and I'd deserve it too. Izuku disagreed with that statement. There was a lot Bakugo could do to make him angrier. He just wasn't capable of doing those things, no matter how much he screamed about killing someone or shouting, "Die," all the time. Well, it was after that when you beat me everything kinda snapped into focus, I guess. The hag called it an awakening, which I guess is right. I realized I'd been a huge asshole for a long time and I'd become everything I used to laugh at on TV. Everything we used to cheer against as All Might fought them on TV. The wording caught Izuku's attention. We. Bakugo had said we. He looked closer at Bakugo and could see the tears welling up in his eyes. Then, at the USJ, seeing you defeat that Nomu. Damn it, I couldn't help but feel like I was watching All Might. And I hated it. I hated it because I knew I wasn't fucking like that. I felt jealous that while I'd been working my butt off to never lose, you'd just up and become like the very person we'd always aspired to be. And. Bakugo's voice cracked and Izuku felt something he hadn't expected to feel for his childhood bully. Concern. Genuine, true concern. They both stood still for a second till Bakugo spoke up again, this time his voice quiet. And I wished I could be like you, too. Izuku couldn't find the words to speak. There wasn't a thing he could say to Bakugo at this moment. Any expectations he'd had, any ideas or notions of where this conversation was going were shattered in mere seconds. He stared wide-eyed as genuine tears ran down Bakugo's face. Damn it, I hate this. I hate that I know I could never be like you. I can't be a real hero like All Might. I couldn't even win as he does during the USJ. I couldn't beat the villains, I just ended up getting us all scattered to the fucking wind. So as much as I don't want to say shit, Deku, please. Help me. 2 words. Those 2 words had never left Bakugo's mouth once in his life. They had never been uttered in this way before, and never to Izuku. As Bakugo looked up resolutely at Izuku, obviously expecting rejection, expecting hatred, expecting everything he felt he deserved, Izuku saw himself. Unchanneled anger, frustration, aggression, power, desire, all without a sail. A sail that had been given life thanks to All Might, his mother, and his burning dedication to saving just one person this time around. Bakugo had been praised as a hero for so long, no one told him how to do it. No one told him what he needed to do to be a good hero. They just said that he would be. And now, it had finally clicked. The last tether keeping him from reality had snapped and Bakugo was crashing. Despite everything, Izuku knew what crashing looked like. He'd felt it on Mars, the day Blazkowicz's died. He couldn't let that happen to Bakugo. Despite his best efforts, even after all these years, some small part of him saw the blonde as his friend. And this was the doorway to getting that friendship back. I do not know if I can help you. Bakugo deflated a little, laughing as he did so. He'd expected this. He deserved to be humiliated and turned away, but before he could move, he felt a hand on his shoulder and no. Izuku looked him in the eye. But I know who can. And with their help, we can both get back to being All Might. Bakugo didn't have the words to describe how this felt. It was as literal tons disappeared off of him in seconds. He laughed and punched Izuku in the shoulder. That was going to take a while to get used to. I can work with that. Just don't get mad when I end up becoming the #1 hero because of this. Izuku snorted at that comment. I mean, I am pretty sure that Aizawa mentioned that our goals need to be realistic. Screw you. You saying I can't become the #1 hero? Well, it will be hard to do so when I have that position. Cute, you got jokes now. Yet another thing I have that you do not, it seems. Say that again, bitch, I dare you. As the two went back and forth, it felt odd how quickly the two fell into a rhythm. It didn't feel forced or unnatural. It felt like they'd been doing it for years. And, maybe, that's exactly what they'd been waiting for all this time. A friendship rekindled that would be stronger than anything seen before. After all, the greatest metals are forged in the hottest fires. He smiled as he reached the door to the support course. It felt oddly satisfying to be regrowing a friendship with Bakugo. It was as if they were always meant to be friends and it just took them 10 to 300 years to remember that particular detail. Izuku shook himself from his thoughts as he pushed open the large blast door. Inside he could see dozens of students with large work areas set up, all using various different machines to work on their individual assignments, projects. He'd been assigned to work area 15, so as he began to head back he watched the students work. They were all oblivious to his presence as he walked through, which wouldn't be problematic if he didn't have to dodge an explosion caused by some girl with pink hair in Station 12. As he reached number 15, he was surprised to see an immaculate-looking station. It looked well put together compared to the other stations, and the tools and gear around the area were far more advanced compared to the rest of it. In the back work table, welding together some pieces of metal through a large magnifying device was a blonde-haired girl who looked to be around 17 or 18 years old. She had some form of black glasses over her eyes as she welded, and her clothes were standard for what Ua normally wore while exercising. As she worked, Izuku carefully set his armor on the center table behind her and waited patiently for her to be at a place where interrupting her wouldn't ruin whatever she was working on. It took a few minutes, but eventually, she finished and lifted her glasses up triumphantly, setting her welder down. As she turned, she jumped slightly at seeing Izuku. "Ah, sorry." Izuku apologized before she could say anything. "You seem caught up in your work and I did not want to interrupt you." "No, it's okay. I totally get it." She smiled. "I do that a lot, so I appreciate your patience. You're the student power loader told me needed to turn in some weaponry and armor, right?" "Yes. Here, let me set it out for you." Izuku quickly pulled out his weapons and amassed them on the table. As he did so, the girl stared wide-eyed at them all, which caused Izuku to bite back a smirk. He knew his gear was top-notch, but it always tickled him inside to see people be surprised by it. As the final weapon was placed on the table, he motioned to them all. "I need to end up safely storing all these and repair the armor I set down on the table for. Hey, are you okay?" Izuku paused as he noticed the girl had tears welling up in her eyes. She wiped at them vigorously before she smiled widely. Instead of responding, she simply reached down and pulled open what looked like a mini fridge door. From there, she pulled out 2 bottles of soda, handing one to Izuku and opening one for herself. As he looked at her questioningly, she swallowed a lump in her throat before she spoke. I believe the last time we spoke, we agreed that I'd be getting drinks, right Izuku?" "Drinks? Last time they spoke? Did Power Loader tell her his na?" Izuku Midoriya." There was silence on the other side of the line for a few moments before Izuku heard a small intake of breath. "It's nice to finally meet you, Izuku. I'm Melissa Shield. I'll see you on the other side." "All right, Melissa. You're buying drinks." Izuku chuckled. It had been something he did with all the other soldiers he'd ever fought with. It only felt right to say it here. "Fair enough. I'll see you there." Izuku didn't wait another moment. He pressed down hard on the gem, crushing it in his grip. There was a loud shriek and a rush of air and liquid as it broke in his grasp. Everything began to fall in around him. The room and reality itself closed in around him. The loud sounds of metal screeching, flesh being mangled, and the dead screaming echoed in his ears. And then, nothing. Hell ceased to exist. And so did he. He took a step forward and asked softly, hoping, begging, pleading for this moment to be real, Melissa?" As tears finally began to fall, she smiled even wider and nodded. It was a surprise to feel the emotions that ran through him. Joy, sorrow, happiness, worry, and above all, relief. In a display that was so beyond his normal range of emotion, he hugged her. She hugged him back. And all the fear, worry, and despair the two had experienced together over those many years trying to destroy Hell once and for all finally began to fall away. In one single moment, both of them felt like the world looked a lot brighter, knowing the other hadn't lost their lives in their endeavor to destroy Hell. It finally felt like the end of it all. Like it was truly gone. And that feeling, That feeling of resolution kept them clinging to each other for almost an hour as they finally cried for everything they'd lost in hell. And now, everything they had to gain in the future. After all, they had each other once more. And they were partners, through and through. It had been what gotten them here in the first place. And that was something that wouldn't die, not in 1,000 years. Chapter 8. The approaching storm. Toshinori Yagi would never admit it, but the support course wing of the school was impossible for him to navigate. He would forever swear Power Loader to secrecy for the number of times he'd had to call him to get out. But it's not like one could blame him. The ridiculously shaped workrooms and random turns made it hard to remember when he needed to go left, turn right, keep walking straight, or even go back since he'd already missed where he needed to go. So one could forgive him for feeling so accomplished in finally memorizing how to get to his favorite niece's station after so long and throwing the door open without knocking and shouting, "I am here." What was arguably less forgivable was his reaction to seeing a very surprised Melissa and his successor hugging each other like their lives depended on it, and from their kneeling positions on the floor, it was pretty obvious they'd been hugging for a while. To put it simply, he reacted like any good godfather, uncle would. He attempted to punch young Midoriya to the moon. Thankfully, Midoriya dodged the initial hit and Melissa grabbed onto him before it could go further. "Uncle Might, calm down. Don't punch Izuku, please." Izuku? First name basis already? If this weren't his niece, All Might would be impressed. Young Midoriya moved fast. Wait, no, that is a bad thing in this case. All Might, hold on, there is more than what you are seeing, I promise. Midoriya held his hands up wide, trying to display himself as non-threatening. The reminder that this was his successor reminded Yagi that this was in fact the future symbol of peace he was trying to put into orbit and could quite honestly probably put up a pretty good fight if he so chose to. Closing the door, he shrunk down from his large form and took in a deep breath. "I apologize for the reaction. That was a bit much, even for me. Now, I would greatly appreciate it if I could get an explanation as to what is going on here." Slowly, the two teens nodded and the three sat down on the chairs around the central workbench. Rather than start speaking immediately, Izuku and Melissa seemed to have a silent conversation with each other before, after a raised eyebrow from Midoriya. Melissa appeared to relent and nod in agreement to something. "So, to avoid beating around the proverbial bush," Midoriya said, taking a moment to suck in a deep breath, "Melissa was in hell with me." It took longer than it should have for those words to process, but when they did, it felt like a train was laying on his chest in his less muscular form. "What? Melissa was another red soul with me in hell. She was my eyes and ears navigating the demon-infested world. Think Oracle for the Bat Fam." Toshinori found himself nodding to what was being told to him, despite his mind not wanting to grasp the concept. His niece, this beautiful little girl that he'd seen grow up and treasured so much, had gone to hell. The oppressing weight of emotions that settled in the pit of his stomach was painful. Is this what Izuku's mother felt after she'd learned about Izuku's past? It was hard to process. He leaned back further into his chair and stiffly motioned for Izuku to continue. "A year after I had really come out of my mindless rage, I ended up cleaning up an old space base for a base of operations. While scrounging up materials needed to fix it, I stumbled across Melissa doing her best to keep the demons from eating her. After clearing them out, she offered to help me with the base and to help me out in my ventures into hell or onto the ruined pieces of Earth. I accepted, and for maybe 5 or 6 years we worked together to defeat hell. Until one day, we did. Melissa seemed to take over from there. After defeating many of the larger powers of hell, including the god of hell himself, Devoth, I located an odd source of argent energy in an unexplored section of the region that seemed to be abandoned. During the search, we found an orb that contained the largest amount of argent energy we'd ever seen before. It was the core of hell, the nucleus that kept the entire place from falling apart." Melissa took a deep breath before continuing. "So, after a moment, we decided to break it. With us inside. Believing that we'd die in the process, we thought it'd be worth it. That maybe we'd save this Earth from the pain they'd been suffering for so long." All Might's mind was pulled from the words his niece was telling him and instead recreated a scene all too familiar to him. Nana, standing before him, beaten, dying, knowing she would die, and yet she told him to run and that she'd take care of the rest. The image of young Midoriya and Melissa flickered over the outline of his teacher, his predecessor, his surrogate mother. The weight of that moment for the two of them was not lost on him. Our final promise to each other was that when we reached the other side, I would buy drinks. Melissa smiled at the memory fondly while the Verdinette chuckled. After that, silence reigned for nearly a minute before Izuku broke the still air with a question. What happened after that? Melissa paused for a moment as if trying to recall all of the details. Well, I returned to the moment when I disappeared, working in my lab trying to complete some class work for I-Island. Despite that, I had a realization that it wasn't enough for me to just be a techie on an island anymore. So I looked to transfer to UA, willing to restart classes altogether if necessary. I wanted to take on the role I once had with Izuku, and be the hero's eye in the sky. So, after a lot of convincing my father, I transferred here for the new year. Izuku smiled at hearing all this. It was entirely a coincidence that they'd met again. It was entirely chance that she'd been the one assigned to get his gear and help in changing it or at minimum storing it. It was pure luck they both came from the same reality, as they thought that red souls were doomed to be the only ones from their reality to ever appear. But, here they were, reunited once again. Well, that's all well and good. All Might interrupted the moment quickly before he could feel any more like he was invading. But I do believe we should address the reason you came here today at all, Midoriya. That caused the Doom Slayer to sigh internally. Right, making his weaponry safe. He despised the concept of making his arsenal weaker in any way, shape, or form, but if this is what it took to even keep them for future use in any shape or form till he was further along in his time here at UA, so be it. And Melissa was the only person who could do it right if it had to happen. Which the teachers had made very clear that it was required to happen. Right, Melissa nodded, pulling up a datapad. Let's start with the guns first. Do you simply want to store them for now?
As much as I hate to do so, yes. Izuku grimaced as he pulled out the rest of his guns. I would rather not make them less likely to do what they intended to do. I expected as much. Melissa nodded and pressed a couple of points on her data pad before the table opened up in the center. As it unfolded to reveal a gun rack, All Might stared in awe while Izuku raised an eyebrow. That is useful. Yep. Melissa looked far too pleased with herself about the reveal, despite Izuku's lack of reaction. Slowly, and with care, All Might watched the two almost reverently place the weapons in the rack before a few more buttons were pressed and the armory lowered into the ground again and became the central table.
What about your armor? It doesn't seem like it's able to maintain itself as easily as it should without Argent energy. Melissa commented and Izuku groaned at that. I'm well aware. I should have been nearly perfectly untouched during that fight against the Nomu with my armor, and yet it dented, cracked, and fell apart as if it were regular UAC armor. Melissa giggled at the joke with all might and just looked confused. Melissa tried to explain the joke, but gave up halfway through when her godfather's eyes glazed over. Right, so, we need a way to generate artificial Argent energy or some other surrogate to help the armor maintain its indestructible state and do so without actually tapping into real Argent energy or requiring demon blood. Melissa began to scour a slew of notes littered across the area. Are there any alternate sources of energy that might be viable? Izuku asked. Potentially. They're all hard to come by though, so it may be a few weeks to get them. I'd need to do some more in-depth testing to get it to work and find something self-sustaining. I'm afraid you two have lost me at this point. What is your plan exactly? The two teens paused their discussion to look back at the befuddled pro before remembering he was there to supervise them and what they were doing with the Doom Slayer arsenal and armor. Basically, the armor Izuku wears is normally nigh invincible as long as it has a constant source of energy to keep its presence in reality from fading. Normally, this was achieved through absorbing the latent energy that came from hell and the demons that lived within it, Argent energy. However, since that's not really an option here, we need to find a different way to power it. Melissa turned back to a computer to begin reviewing materials and start her research as she finished her explanation. Izuku stood silently as All Might continued to ask Melissa questions about the armor, the BFG, and all of Midoriya's other demon-slaying tools. Something was eating at the back of his mind. He felt like there was a solution staring them right in the face and he was forgetting it and it was bothering him. He began to reflect on possibilities as he tried to work out what it could be that was bothering him. The Repertorium wasn't an option. The tower wasn't here in this reality. Argent energy as a whole was a big no-no for both him and Melissa if it was even possible at this point with the dimension itself having imploded. As he sat there, he felt a familiar tingle in his chest. Looking down, he saw the brief sparks of red lightning, reminding him of another avenue he had available to him. A seemingly bottomless pit of energy that grew with him. All Might. Izuku's interruption caused both blondes to turn to him. What if we were to use one for all? All Might's face went through a few expressions very rapidly. Surprised at the question, a look of nervousness directed at Melissa's own questioning face, before genuine thought and concern. One for all? The female artificer's eyes raised at the name. She hadn't heard of one for all before. She'd never heard either Uncle Might or Izuku mention it in the past. And judging from her uncle's expression, that may have been on purpose. While I see merit to the idea, I wish you hadn't outed it so easily to Melissa without consulting me ahead of time. With all due respect, All Might, whatever reasons you may have for keeping her out of the loop feel pretty moot point from my perspective. She's already been through hell, literally. I trust her more than anyone else on this planet. Melissa smiled fondly at the trust and offered a small fist bump to the Verdinet, which he easily returned. All Might sighed, chuckling softly at the interaction. A fair point, my boy. A fair point, Midoriya. So can I please get an explanation of what one for all is? The two males glanced at each other before nodding and began to explain. How they met, Izuku's training before entering Hell, what All Might had given him, and the goal of giving Izuku the quirk he did. With all of this, Melissa began to run calculations on the computer. I'd have to take some time to figure out how much power your quick can output over a given amount of time, but that seems plausible. If we can find a proper quirk energy converter and retrofit it to just dump that energy directly into the suit's mainframe, it should be able to repair itself and maintain itself in the physical world better. So we just have to start figuring out what my power output is, then, Izuku confirmed. Precisely. All Might and Izuku looked at each other before grinning. Well, this is gonna be fun. All Might began to swell up and posed before the two teens. Indeed it is. Let us go to the testing site Gamma to begin measuring, shall we? Why not do so with a spar? Sounds perfect, Midoriya said, while Melissa groaned. The two took off out of the support studio and towards the training city for their spar, leaving the young blonde behind. Boys, she sighed as she gathered every piece of equipment she had that could measure energy and quirk levels before beginning to follow them. Hopefully, she could get there to get accurate measurements before they started. Aizawa didn't know whether to ignore what he saw rushing toward one of the testing sites on the UA campus or strangle the two obviously overeager duo getting ready for what was obviously going to be a training bout that was going to leave poor Cementos with hours of work to do. Instead, he simply chose to alert Nezu, who alerted the rest of the staff to come and watch, because of course, he wouldn't stop this. Days like this made the underground pro really wish he could get his hands on the annoying rat, but he knew it wouldn't do anything but hurt his chances of surviving Nezu's overthrow of the government in the future. Whether or not the Chimera would actually go through with those plans was up for debate, but he wasn't about to take chances if he was being honest. So now, here he was, gathered with the rest of the staff around a series of cameras littered about the Gamma as a blonde girl. Melissa Shield, from what Nezu said, placed a series of devices all around Midoriya's body. Some kind of measuring devices of some sort. Other devices were placed on drones and shot into the sky before the girl finally gathered everything up and headed back to the viewing tower near the front gates. As the two combatants stretched in preparation, the teachers that were there began to discuss the oncoming brawl amongst themselves. So, how long do you think it'll take before Midoriya gets knocked out? Present Mike asked. A fine idea, Hizashi. A bet would be a wonderful way to raise the stakes on viewing such an event. Nezu grinned. clapping his hands together softly before picking up his cup of tea. Oh, give All Might more credit than that. Midnight smirked. There's no way he'd go all out from the get-go. Besides, I want to see the two of them show off those muscles a bit longer. Isn't Midoriya 15 years younger than you? Cementos asked nervously. Oh shush, let me appreciate fine muscles where I can. I'm not going to do anything unbecoming. The R-rated hero grinned at Izuku's shirtless body. Well, I imagine it'd be about 5 minutes before Midoriya gets knocked cold. I give him 2. Present Mike said, grinning. Given what that kid's done in the past, I'd say they go for a solid 10 minutes. Powerloader said. Eraserhead stayed silent as the others bantered back and for about how long Midoriya would last and why they were right. What about you, Shota? The tired pro looked back at Nezu, who was grinning at him expectantly. Surely as his main teacher and as someone who watched him fight the Nomu, you have some interesting insights to add. He scoffed. Of course, the rat would make him say it. Here he'd been trying to stay silent and avoid this illogical conversation, but here he was being dragged into it. He could feel the expectant eyes of his coworkers as they waited for him to agree with one of their opinions. The fight won't end till All Might runs out of time to maintain his quirk. There was a pregnant pause before a collective, huh? Shota, not to bash on you, my guy, but you sure you ain't buttering up your students' skills there? Bit of rose-shaded glasses there? Present Mike asked confused. That would be illogical and unnecessary. Midoriya at the USJ fought a monster designed with multiple quirks, specifically chosen to fight All Might. You all saw the data found from the corpse we discovered floating off the coast. It was designed to take a beating and keep on going. And Midoriya not only beat it, he killed it. Wasn't that All Might's doing though? Didn't he get the finishing blow? Aizawa could see many of his other pros agree with Midnight's reasoning. No, he didn't. He stopped the remaining villains from attacking Midoriya while he was drained of energy. It was Problem Child who fought and defeated the Nomu. Every other teacher was silent at this revelation while Nezu began to laugh hysterically. Well then, this will be mightily interesting, don't you all agree? Besides, this is the perfect opportunity to observe what a hero of hundreds of years is capable of, no? Without another word, Aizawa turned back to the screens and watched as the #1 hero settled into a battle stance across from Midoriya, who simply loosened himself and leaned forward, his fists clenched tightly at his side. No words were spoken between the two as the very air began to electrify around them in anticipation of what was to come. Neither moved as the world seemed to wait with bated breath. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 the world exploded with wind and light. Izuku could feel one for all coursing throughout his body at a rapid pace. He could feel the electricity surging through his veins, his entire form moving at paces he'd never felt previously. His awakened body and mind easily keeping up with new power coursing through his veins kept him in the moment as he clashed for the very first time in his life, fist to fist, against All Might. The sheer power of the initial blows between the two destroyed many of the walls of the buildings surrounding them. Oh come now, Izuku, you can do better than that, All Might shouted out, a smile wide across his face as he followed up with a jab at Izuku's chest. The Doomslayer ducked the blow and moved to land an uppercut to All Might's stomach. The pro blocked the blow and grabbed Midoriya's wrist. Oklahoma Smash. The attack's name ripped through the air as Izuku was sent hurtling toward one of the buildings. Before he could make an impact, Izuku used his innate Argent energy to jump higher into the air before dashing forward faster than he ever had before, stopping himself from impacting the building. As he approached the pro, All Might leapt into the air and pulled back his arm, the name of his attack beginning to reach his lips before Midoriya somersaulted and moved to axe kick midair. Adjusting course, he blocked the kick, only to be sent to the ground from the force of the blow. All Might dodged back from the ground to avoid Izuku as the team kicked against the air to rocket himself into the ground at insane speeds. The two began a dance of sheer power, speed, and experience no one alive could rival. Heroes beyond the standards of their peers, dueling to prove their ability. Izuku could feel his body burning, but in the best way possible. The sheer amount of power shivering in his core, screaming to be unleashed, filling him with an unquenchable determination to fight as hard as he could against his hero. It was unlike anything he'd felt before.
Rage had given him the strength and stamina to defeat all of hell, that was undeniable. But this was different. The source, the reasoning, and even the degree were different. Before, he felt like a sword, perfectly honed to cut down his foes. Now he felt like the embodiment of the titans he'd only ever battled using his weapons and the crucible in the past. It was exhilarating.
The earth cracked around the two as neither could land a solid blow. The buildings around them were demolished by the sheer wind force of any of their attacks that were missed entirely. All Might grinned at his successor. Midoriya was pushing him to his limit. If he were in his prime, he could have won much sooner. Now though, it was likely he would run out of gas before either could trounce the other. And while it might temporarily hurt his pride, it made him beyond hopeful for the future. Detroit Smash. All Might finally landed a solid blow into Izuku's side, sending him end over end through a few buildings before he regained his stance and charged back toward the pro. Just because he had a feeling it'd end before he won didn't mean wasn't going to give it his plus ultra to remind his successor of the word humility. Izuku grinned as he ran forward, using his Argent energy to dodge around another Detroit Smash and return the favor with a high-powered roundhouse to the back. All Might caught himself fairly quickly as the energy from the attack was forcefully dissipated by a punch from All Might to stop his momentum. And it began again in earnest. Izuku could feel the sting of bruises forming, his body was growing sore and All Might hit hard. But he could keep up with the hits. For every blow he took, he dealt one back. It was even standing ground for the most part, with All Might getting the occasional hit extra on him. But that's where he had a bead over All Might. His body was in perfect condition, and with One for All powering it, he could take a lot more punishment. Steam began to erupt around the area as the fight continued, and the surrounding fake city was demolished. The fight had lasted for nearly 10 minutes, the never-ending stamina of the two had kept them going almost infinitely. Key word being almost. Izuku was hurting, and steam was flowing off All Might in waves. As they slid back from each other after a particularly powerful traded blows, All Might laughed. Midoriya, any worries I have about the future have been shattered. All Might grinned as he gulped down oxygen. You've proved many times over that even with a quirk you haven't fully mastered and only begun to learn to use, you can hold your own. Of course. What kind of successor would I be if I didn't? Izuku asked, popping his shoulders and stretching his arms in a way that relieved the tension just a bit. How about we settle this with one final blow, truly put our backs into it? Midoriya, rather than respond, simply pulled his arm back and let One for All begin to gather in his body, winding up. All Might grinned as he did the same. They only remained still for a brief second, but they crossed the distance in what seemed like the blink of an eye, circling around each other, jabbing violently with their non-dominant arms as they prepared to finish their spar. As the winds began to encompass them, a miniature tornado flowing around them as they tried to break the other's concentration on the blow to come, All Might spoke. Do you remember what I told you when I first gave you One for All? I do now. Took a while to find the journal on what little I'd written about that. Then you should know what I'm going to say to you now. Clench your butt cheeks and yell this from the depths of your heart. All Might's arm surged forward at the same time Izuku's did. As the very air around them superheated and expanded at a rapid rate, only one thing could be heard above the crashing winds. Texas Smash. The world erupted as debris, air, and even light were scattered around, rattling every camera, drone, and piece of tech within the area, destroying almost anything within the vicinity of the entire testing site. As the energy died down, All Might stood there in his depowered form before sweating, bruised Izuku, both their fists to the other's chest. They stood there silently, breathing heavily for a moment before Izuku collapsed into All Might's arms, too tired, sore, and bruised to even move. But he was still conscious. Oh. My. Goodness, young Midoriya. All Might grinned at his successor who just smiled back widely.
Took everything I have for right now, but I'd say I held my own. He said, gulping down oxygen like there was no tomorrow. Indeed. I do hope my niece got what she needed out of this, he said, looking at the thankfully still intact observation tower.
Oh, yeah, I got it. Melissa's voice erupted from a drone that descended down in front of them. Needless to say, after everything you just displayed, Izuku, I can make it work, and then some. I'll be able to do a lot more than make the suit keeps its original function. Izuku could hear the science nerd in her screaming in joy. Whatever the results were, they were good. Perfect, he said, struggling to stand. Now, I need to make a visit to the recovery girl. This shiner on my face is not exactly doing me any favors, and I don't want my mom to panic. All Might felt his heart stop at the mention of recovery girl. Oh, there'd be hell to pay when they got there. He had no doubt she was not pleased with their impromptu brawl. He could already feel the can beat him over the head. You half-witted, irresponsible, no good, excuse of a hero. Nope. He was just actually getting beat with her cane. Both All Might and Midoriya learned that day that when she wanted to, Recovery Girl could move very quickly. For better or for worse. Well, I hope everyone liked the story, and please share or leave a like, or subscribe to see that you guys like the story, and I'll see you all on the next one.